The story begins with a sequence of images depicting supernatural creatures and a man dying in his office. Following this, the scene shifts to his home, where he was calmly watering his plants, sipping coffee, and at one point during the day, watching an isekai on TV, in which a boy accesses his status menu. Shortly after, while holding a tablet and browsing an online store, he is mysteriously transported to a forest of gigantic trees, where a strange little green girl appears near him. As soon as she vanishes without a trace, the man, terrified, runs through the forest and stumbles upon the skeleton of a warrior with a sword plunged into his chest. Imitating the boy from the TV isekai, he mimics the action he saw and commands the status menu to open. At that moment, a menu appears displaying his information: Kenichi Hamada, 38 years old, as well as Shangri-La and item box. Thinking he's landed in an isekai, Kenichi wonders where his HP and MP are, along with his abilities and magic. Clicking on Shangri-La, he accesses the online store where he usually shops. He then opens the item box, but since it's empty, he inserts some grass to test it before discarding it. Delighted, he comments that being in another world is just too good. To further enjoy the experience, he tries to buy food through the menu, but realizes he doesn't have enough credit. He even attempts to assess the grass he collected to see if he could exchange it for food, but of course, the item is worthless, frustrating him once again. However, glancing around, he notices the sword and the warrior's remains and exchanges it for a snack. After eating, he also buys a shovel and buries the dead warrior out of respect, as he had saved Kenichi. With the money from the sword, he purchases a bicycle, leather work boots, a sports towel, a compass, and a monocle. Biking around, he concludes that he needs to find a settlement and earn money. Later, he prepares a proper meal using a pot, stove, and everything. Leveraging his prior knowledge, Kenichi uses the money he earned to buy items and resell them at a higher price. So far, he has been doing very well in this isekai and was enjoying his stay until a pack of horned wolves appears. Panicked, Kenichi searches the store for something to defend himself. The first thing he sees is a bow and arrow, but having never used this weapon before, he decides to buy fireworks and a blowtorch to scare off the creatures. He throws the lit fireworks towards the pack, and the wolves back off a bit, but they don't give up and stay nearby. Not wanting to be outdone, Kenichi buys a slingshot and shoots at the wolves several times. This time, the wolves finally flee, allowing Kenichi to escape as fast as possible on his bicycle, delving deeper into the forest by late afternoon. As dawn breaks, he is exhausted from such an intense escape. Lifting himself up, he wonders if he has reached the edge of the forest. To check for himself, he buys a ladder, and upon climbing it, he spots a city protected by walls. In other words, now he can earn money. With this in mind, he purchases black pepper and a leather bag to try his luck within the walls. On the way, Kenichi is nearly run over by a young man driving a cart and is surprised to hear him speak Japanese, indicating that communication with the local people is possible. The cart driver offers a ride to Dahlia, assuming that's where he is headed. The young man introduces himself as Fio, a merchant. Inside the cart, there is a woman whom Fio introduces as a traveling bard and companion. After Kenichi states his name, the merchant notes the man's strange clothes and name and inquires about his intentions in Dahlia. Kenichi says he wants to do business, but Fio points out that he has no luggage, leading him to suspect that Kenichi has an item box. The bard conjures her bandolin using hers and plays a song about the fine rain that brought the man and the wind and rain in his trail of journey. His journey will begin from there. Sometime later, when they arrive in Dahlia, Kenichi helps Fuyu unload some boxes. In gratitude for the ride, he gives the merchant some black pepper. Fuyu wonders why he wants to sell such a dangerous item, as Bacopa, the spice syndicate, holds the monopoly in the region, and this pepper falls under that. If those guys see Kenichi selling this spice, the foreigner will have trouble. However, since it's a personal gift, Fuyu insists on paying because, according to him, local merchants love to buy things cheaply, but never accept anything for free. With that, he gives Kenichi some strange coins and leaves. Kenichi examines the coins in the item box and sees that they are 1 copper, 1 square silver, and another silver. Since the value of these coins is described, he makes 108,000 yen, roughly $700, something he could never have imagined. By late afternoon, he goes to a tavern, where a girl greets the customer, claiming it is the best in Dahlia. Kenichi informs her he came to stay, so the girl charges 1 copper coin for lodging or a small square silver for 2 meals. As he only wanted lodging, the visitor pays the copper coin, but when he needs to sign his name on the tavern's list, he remembers he doesn't know how to write in the local language. The girl notices his strange clothes and asks if he's looking for an intermediary. Actually, Kenichi tells her he intends to do business on his own. However, she explains that the Merchants Guild will not register someone who cannot read, write, and calculate. The man corrects her that he knows how to do these things, but perhaps not according to local culture. Then the receptionist asks him to imagine if she has 4 bags containing 12 rinkas each, how many rinkas she has in total. Kenichi answers 48, and the girl is impressed with the mathematical talent of this genius. Afterward, she asks for his name to write on the paper and introduces herself as Azalea. Kenichi asks her to teach him the local language in exchange for some snacks from another country as a reward. The woman didn't hesitate and accepted the offer. After enjoying the sweets given to her in Kenichi's room, she became so enamored with them that she made a point of mentioning that there was nothing like it in the kingdom of Kaden. Fulfilling her part of the agreement, Azalea taught the foreigner the native language of Kaden, and he discovered it wasn't so different from Japanese, with the numbers using the same decimal system and digits handled in the same way as Arabic numerals. While posing for a drawing and seeing how quickly the man learned to read and write, Azalea imagined that he would soon become a great merchant and consider becoming his lover. However, Kenichi thought she should avoid an old man like him, especially since he was old enough to be her father. Sometime later, Kenichi finished the drawing, leaving Azalea delighted, feeling noble for having been sketched. She then hugged the man affectionately, emphasizing that he had given her sweets and made her portrait. With that, she dragged the man somewhere and turned off the room light. The next morning, Kenichi went to the guild to register, and the receptionist asked him to fill out a form. Noticing that the papers were handwritten, Kenichi guessed that they had not yet discovered printing. After completing the paperwork and being charged a silver coin for the registration fee, nearly 50,000 yen, which would seriously dent Kenichi's wallet, he requested to pay in installments. As this was possible, the woman handed a guild ID to the foreigner. Kenichi was to keep this ID visible while conducting business, which is why Fuyu had one with him. After leaving the guild, he walked through Dahlia's market and noted that 2 lightly brown sheets of paper cost 1 copper coin, a simple dish cost 1 small square silver coin, and a low-quality knife cost 1 silver coin, which he found expensive. Suddenly, a girl approached Kenichi and offered 10 tricolor fruits for 1 copper coin. Wanting to try a variety, he picked several and took them in a bag, though he had no idea what type of fruit they were. To find out, he stored the food where the names were written. The fruits were called Rinyos, Rinzis, and Rinka, the latter of which Kenichi gave to Azalea when he returned to the tavern. The girl was overjoyed with the gift, as she loved that food. When Kenichi returned to his room, he examined his ID until he fell asleep. At dawn, he impressed Azalea by showing off his carpentry skills, setting up a sales booth by himself. Moreover, the woman noticed the nails he used and explained that hers were too weak, so she wished to buy the ones he had. With this, Kenichi envisioned a profitable business opportunity with that product. Later, he went to his street space to summon his booth that was stored in his item box. A merchant next door glanced at the foreigner's products and showed interest in the nails. Kenichi told her they cost 1 copper coin for 5, so she bought that quantity and introduced herself as Anama. As the hours passed, no one visited their stalls and Kenichi started to get bored. However, as time stretched, some people began showing interest in what he was selling in his booth, especially the nails, brought some traffic on the first day. Anama commented that the nails were selling well and thanked him for drawing customers to her stall too. Grateful for the recognition, Kenichi realized he had made 15,000 yen in profit. Perhaps he could live off selling just nails, but it was likely that imitators selling something similar would soon appear. A well-dressed man with a sword at his waist appeared at the booth, and Kenichi thought he might be a high-ranking person. The man asked to see a knife, and upon testing its sharpness, inquired about the price. Kenichi said it cost 2 silver coins. The buyer found it expensive, but having never seen such a perfect blade, he understood its value. He then asked if the seller had anything bigger than the knife, and as Kenichi didn't, he checked his shop menu while reflecting that finding something larger would be difficult. Nonetheless, he eventually found a hunting sword and offered it to the interested party, who was impressed by its beauty. However, when he heard that it cost a gold coin, he internally struggled with the desire for the item but thought it was too expensive. Kenichi wondered if he had charged too much, but knew he had to take what he could from those who could afford it. In the midst of this, a catwoman approached the booth, sniffing around until she licked Kenichi's nose. Then she was punched by 3 beast men who were following her mildly. Kenichi was startled, having never seen such humanoid creatures before, while one of them ripped off the tarp that served as the booth's roof and showed a willingness to pay for it. Kenichi agreed to sell, but the calculations he made to charge for the 3 tarps the buyer wanted confused the beast people, who suspected the seller was a swindler. However, the swordsman assured them that the seller was correct, and embarrassed by their own foolishness, the beasts left with their tarps. Afterwards, the swordsman decided to buy the sword. After the day's work, Kenichi paid for 5 nights of lodging. Meanwhile, at a mansion, the maid Margaret showed the nails she bought to her mistress, Primula. Impressed by the quality of the items, Primula decided to also sell them in her store. After all, the motto of the Mallow Mercantile Company was, "Never let an opportunity pass by." Returning to Kenichi, he decided to take a hot bath before nightfall. He thought about buying a bathing barrel, filling it with river water, and heating it on fire, but if he wanted these luxuries, he needed to earn more. By the way, he wondered how this Shangri-La worked, since the products simply appeared out of nowhere for him. Reflecting on it, the merchant thought there must be some catch to this scheme, like a fee he hadn't discovered yet but was accumulating as he bought there. In the midst of this, a dirty little girl hunted a bird in the forest to eat. Her dream was to eat until she was full. Suddenly, a man shouted for anemone, so the girl ran off. The next day, Kenichi wakes up early again to set up his stall and continue with his plan. Just like him, Anama also repeats this routine with her rug. As he arranges the necklaces in the store, he reflects that they might not be quartz or diamond, but zirconium and cut glass should still be quite valuable in this world, and he thinks it would be nice if he could attract a woman's attention with them. Meanwhile, Anama approaches and, seeing the organized accessories, comments that the shopkeeper always has good items in stock and wants to know who the supplier is, but Kenichi smiles and replies that it's a trade secret. At that moment, Margaret, the same maid from yesterday, approaches Kenichi in search of 100 clothespins, which impresses the vendor. Calculating the money he will make, he eagerly separates the items while Margaret eyes one of the necklaces for sale. She asks if it is diamond, and Kenichi informs her that it was made from polished glass. In fact, it's zirconia, but the vendor keeps quiet about that. He says the item costs 6 small silver coins, and the woman is surprised by the low price and asks him to reserve it for her. When it's time to pack up the stall to leave, Kenichi is approached by the same beasts as yesterday. Miley sneaks up and smells spices on the merchant. Hearing this, the big guys beg Kenichi to sell them some spices, although the human has no idea what they are talking about. Anama intervenes and asks the beasts to stop making unreasonable demands on the new guy in the market, as it would be terrible if he ended up in the sights of Bakeuppa, the spice syndicate. With that, the trio of beast people bow to ask for forgiveness, while the surrounding inhabitants pay attention to the scene and wait for an outcome, imagining that the newcomer would never go against Bakeuppa, even if it involves the soul food of the beast people. Thus, Kenichi knows he cannot sell spices, but figures there's no problem if he offers food prepared with seasoning. So he will make the food just this once, but they must eat near the river on the outskirts of the city. Hearing these words, the beast dance with joy, and Anama asks to come along. Not wanting to waste time, the big guys help pack up the merchant's stall in seconds and drag him to the mentioned place. Once there, Kenichi asks his new friend to help by cutting some vegetables, and she asks if they are really vegetables because of the color. Kenichi replies that they are from a foreign land, but they are quite tasty. To diversify the menu, the beast people catch some fish and eagerly await the meal. When it's finally ready, they get excited with all the enthusiasm possible, and when they try this type of food prepared by a human for the first time, they fall madly in love at first bite. Anama even comments that they are eating with silver spoons looking like nobles, but Kenichi corrects in his mind that they are stainless steel. The beasts emphasize that a drink would go well with this dinner, and Anama tells them to show some restraint. But Kenichi is more relaxed and remembers that everyone is having fun, so he buys a 4-liter bottle of shashu online. The condition for the beasts to get this drink is not to tell anyone about this meal, and everyone agrees easily. A bit later, talking alone with the man, his fellow merchant asks if he isn't being too generous, but he sees nothing wrong with forgetting reality once in a while. Miley approaches and asks for more drink, and the human takes the opportunity to introduce himself. Similarly, from right to left, the beasts introduce themselves as Myakuro, Naimelo, and Nyanji. After that, the quartet of beast people take a dive to digest with mastery, and Kenichi throws a bar of soap for them to take a decent bath. After the bath, the merchant buys beds and warm blankets for everyone to lie down on the grass, and the people pass out right there, while Kenichi admires the sea of stars that enchants the sky with its beauty. When dawn comes again and the guy returns to the inn, Azalea questions if he stayed out all night, but not that she cares since he paid for the room. Seeing no problem with the intrusion, he tells her that he took a stroll with the beast people by the river, but Azalea responds that he could have stayed with her instead of some beast woman. Kenichi argues that there weren't only women there, so Azalea slaps his clothes and releases some silky and shiny beast woman hairs. Later, as he begins setting up his stall, the man wonders if Azalea has started to hate him because of this, but the truth is that he doesn't need women in the peaceful life he's seeking. In the midst of this, Margaret leads her mistress to the foreigner's store, then Primula approaches and enchants Kenichi with her extraordinary beauty. After controlling his feelings, he asks if the client came to buy the item he set aside for her, and Margaret makes the payment before receiving the necklace and passing it to her mistress. After hearing that the item was made of glass, Primula looks more closely and asks if the vendor is sure it's not real diamond. Kenichi confirms it's polished glass, but still the woman wants to take a look at other necklaces in case they are available. Promptly, the store owner shows more similar items, and Primula is impressed to see that he uses an item box to store them. Seeing everything there, she formally introduces herself to the shopkeeper and asks him to meet her father, the owner of the Mallow Mercantile Company. Anama tells that the Mallows are major merchants in Dahlia, and that the company's boss is a kind-hearted and much-loved man. Listening attentively, Kenichi sees this as his chance to gain contact with the major company. Soon after accepting the proposal, on the way, he comments that he has never traveled in such a fancy carriage as this, and Primula replies laughing that the nobles have even more extravagant carriages. Then she tells that she hired a craftsman to try replicating the clothespins that Kenichi sells, but the professional ended up not being able to do it, as according to him, the metal of the clothespin may seem simple, but it requires advanced technology to be made. Without delay, they arrive at a mansion that leaves the man in awe, although Primula insists it's small compared to a noble's home. Inside, Mallow introduces himself and praises the visitor's manners for doing the same. Kenichi presents the items that captivated the man's daughter, and the company owner himself seems to have fallen in love with them. Primula whispers something in her father's ear, then he asks Kenichi if he indeed has an item box. The younger salesman confirms he does, though it's small, and the older one shows his on the table. He used this box to make his company what it is today. In turn, Kenichi shares that he only uses his for storing crops, which prompts a laugh during the conversation. Speaking of which, the visitor asks why he is there, so Mallow offers Kenichi a position as a supplier for the merchant company. The visitor wonders if the tycoon can find the right market for these items and sell them for even more profit, and Mallow assures him he can. In that case, Kenichi asks if it wouldn't be easier for the businessman to buy at his store and resell them later. Mallow comments that Kenichi might not like that, and he indeed confesses he wouldn't. Additionally, Mallow reveals there's a chance company rivals might make a better offer, and securing a deal would be a way to ensure that doesn't happen. By the way, the businessman makes it clear that he couldn't stand any competitor signing an exclusive contract with Kenichi, as that would be the silliest thing a trader could do. Moreover, one of the secrets to the great profits of Mallow's merchant company is, don't be fooled by the profit in front of you. You might miss an even better business opportunity. With that said, Mallow offers to split the profits 50-50, and Kenichi shakes hands with the experienced merchant. With that handshake, the rookie gains tens of thousands on items he could buy for 2,000 or 3,000, meaning the deal is in the bag. After signing the exclusive contract, Kenichi earned over 500,000 yen from the first products he supplied, such as the cameo brooch. Enamored with the brooch, Primula herself offered 10 gold coins for one, equivalent to 2 million yen, or about 77,000 Brazilian reais. Therefore, because of deals like this, Kenichi's balance in Shangri-La had already exceeded 8 digits, so he decided to buy a house. After all, now that he had money, the middle-aged man could start the peaceful life he always wanted. Always with this in mind, he crosses the outskirts of the city until he reaches the more remote forested areas. At one point in the forest, he decides he'll set up base there. However, when he returns to the inn and finds Azalea in his room, she warns him that the area is very dangerous. Kenichi acknowledges this and argues that he won't live too far from the city walls, but the girl insists that his desire is odd. In the following days, despite his friend's warnings, the man mows the grass on the plot where he will build his home using a modern mower, also purchased at the Shangri-La store, of course. The problem is that it runs on fuel, which is an issue. To solve this, the trader bought mixed gasoline for 2-stroked engines, which is quite expensive. After all, there's not much choice besides that, since they don't sell fuel there. Eventually, he builds a road leading to his land, and after that, cuts some trees with a chainsaw and an axe. However, after completing this task, he tries to store the huge logs in his item box, but it wasn't possible due to their size. To solve this, he summons the electric saw and splits the logs into smaller pieces so he can finally store them all. Once done, he discovers that the wood only fits if it's no longer than 10 meters. After that, seeing that night is approaching, the man decides to leave the rest of the work for tomorrow. When the sun rises again, Kenichi Hamada resumes work on building his house. Alone with a shovel, he digs around the extensive root of a tree to remove it from the plot where the house would be. However, considering he still has many others to dig up and he's already exhausted from the first, he throws in the towel and buys a backhoe. The problem is, he soon realizes he spent 1.2 million yen on impulse. To make matters worse, this vehicle runs on diesel, which they also don't sell in this world or at Shangri-La. To not waste the investment, the man buys kerosene for camping equipment, but before throwing in the excavator on a whim, he decides to test it on a diesel generator to avoid damaging the vehicle. In the end, after all this trouble, he manages to start the generator and celebrates his success. When night falls, Kenichi takes a bath in the nearby river, although he knows he needs to do something about the insects before they get to him. At that moment, the man remembers Azalea recommended an insect-repelling stone sold at the tool store near the market. When morning comes, Kenichi goes there and is greeted by an old man who, according to the trader himself, looks very much like a wizard. As the attendant comments that he has never seen Kenichi in these lands before, he shares that he came from outside, and the old man shows interest in buying interesting products from foreign territory. Hamada asks if the store has any insect-repelling stones, and promptly, the attendant extends his hand and informs him that it costs 3 silver coins, a price the buyer finds too expensive. To bargain, he offers 2 oranges, and the seller reduces the price to 2 silver coins with the fruits included in the deal. After buying the stone, Kenichi sets up his tent and learns from Manama that the old man is a walking encyclopedia in Dahlia. That said, the man notices a wanted poster on the wall. The criminal depicted is Shaga, the leader of the bandits in this area. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a man sells the little girl with blue hair, and she is placed in a carriage full of girls. However, the carriage is attacked by Shaga's gang along the way. Returning to the protagonist, he's having fun with his new diesel-powered toy, pulling out all the roots in the middle of his plot. Despite the great effort, it's all for his dream of a peaceful life in this world, although his balance after buying the excavator is quite sad. The next day, the merchant goes to Lord Malab to show the sugar he wants to sell. Kenichi had high hopes for this product, but judging by the man's reaction when tasting the food, it seems he didn't like it much. Malab states that salt and sugar are indeed precious, but the kingdom holds exclusive rights over them, so he cannot purchase from Kenichi. This frustrates the merchant as he thought it would yield a good return, but he had another ace up his sleeve, jewels that could fetch some money. After the meeting, Primula walks through the city and sees merchants passing through the massive gate of Dahlia, but she knows that the professional who has stood out the most is someone she knows, Kenichi Hamada, with his incredible products never seen there before. Upon returning home, Kenichi figures he made 15 gold coins in his dealings with the Mallow company, and with that, he can buy his long-dreamed wooden stall, which was priced at an impressive 1.7 million yen, about 65,000 rias. However, as soon as he buys the product at the store, the house is thrown to the ground completely dismantled. He reads the item's description and discovers that he had to assemble it himself, which is why it was so cheap. Not knowing what to do with all that wood, Kenichi sits atop the pile and laments the work he'll have. Still, he retrieves his tractor and gets to work. To improve his situation, the beast men he had met went hunting and found the man on the way. So to repay the food he made for them that day, the beasts helped Kenichi build his dwelling. Meanwhile, the human kept his stall in the market, and several weeks passed with his friends assisting in the construction. It took just under a month for the wooden cabin to stand. After all that work, Kenichi lies in his new bed to relax, but he's far from finishing everything he plans for the place where he will live. In fact, he needs to arrange electricity, besides painting the walls and the ceiling. Kenichi took another month to complete these tasks. He made the fences, treated the wood, and prepared his bathroom to recycle waste as fertilizers. He added a kitchen with a sink and, for electricity, installed 20 solar panels. Moreover, he built a small stall outside where he could use a drum for bathing, which he filled using a gasoline tank to transport water from the river. Delighted, he enjoys his first bath in the middle of the forest since arriving in this new world. At that moment, he realized that his life as the ruler of his own domain had officially begun. The next day, he informs Azalea that he's moving to his new house, so he thanks her for everything she did and bids farewell, to the young woman's surprise and sadness. In the late afternoon, Kenichi arrives home and summons his bicycle to enjoy a ride and takes some pictures in the forest flowers, but someone was willing to spoil that day. An arrow shoots out of nowhere and hits the ground in front of the bicycle, causing Kenichi to fall hard. To make matters worse, more arrows were shot at him, so the man had to run for his life until he took cover behind a tree trunk. Looking around, he realizes that it was the beast people acting aggressively. Not to be outdone, Kenichi pulls out his slingshot and shoots several times at the attackers, managing to knock one down. Then he sets off some firecrackers to scare the beast people, while summoning his tractor to put an end to this mess. Seeing the huge contraption approaching, the beasts finally flee. After getting rid of the danger, Kenichi tries to understand the motivation behind the attack, until he hears the moan of a feline injured in the woods. Quickly, the man goes to the animal and sees it with an arrow embedded in its thigh. As the animal showed hostility when he approached, Kenichi buys items for the arm and neck to protect himself from a possible bite and removes the arrow from the feline's thigh, which is already too weak to react. Then he cleans the wound with saline solution and uses alcohol and ointment to disinfect it, along with some painkillers. After doing this, the man fears the animal might not survive, so he decides to take it home in a wheelbarrow he bought just for that. Since there are likely no veterinarians in this world, Kenichi goes in search of some healing magic at a store, where the merchant says it was lucky the guy found the lynx, as their pelts are highly valued in the market. Later, he returns to Analma, who finds it strange that he rescued an animal. Amid this, Miley arrives unexpectedly and quite excited, as according to her, lynxes are messengers of the gods in her culture, and she would love to see the feline. Seeing the injured lynx, the girl is sure that the dogmen did this and vows not to forgive them for this reason. Kenichi applies more ointment to the animal's wound, which ends up licking the product, so the merchant decides to buy a neck collar to prevent this from happening again. Miley asks if Kenichi is a doctor, and he says no, although he knows first aid. Happy because of the care he took with a sacred animal, the beast woman decides to thank on behalf of the lynx by hunting some birds, which serve for the barbecue at the end of the afternoon. After eating, the freeloader lies in bed and announces that she will spend the night there. Kenichi asks about her job, but the girl is more concerned with the lynx. The human warns that he only has one bed, so Miley takes the opportunity to suggest that they sleep together. Thus, that really happens, and Miley sleeps like a good kitty on top of the man. Several days later, the lynx was recovering well, so the homeowner started working on the plantation. The problem is that, to water the plants, he would have to fetch water from the river every time, which is a huge hassle. To reverse this, the man thinks about digging a well. At night, things were calm while he slept near the lynx until the image of a huge tree appears, where Kenichi slept in the lap of a woman with purple hair. Then the lynx jumps on the poor man's belly, as if saying it's already well. To confirm this theory, the feline goes to the door and makes it clear that it wants Kenichi to open it. When he does, the man watches the animal head into the woods and wishes it a good life. In the following days, Kenichi took some more time off from his stall to tend to his land and complete the well. A week later, he finally managed to pump water directly into his bath barrel. Amidst this, to his surprise, Primula showed up at his house, marveling at everything around her. She explained that she was worried because Kenichi had disappeared from the market for so long and Miley had told her about where he was now living. By the way, she asked what on earth that giant metal thing was. Not knowing how to explain the tractor he had acquired, Kenichi fibbed that it was a familiar he had summoned, and that Primula must keep it a secret that he knew how to use magic. Having gotten himself into this pickle for free, Kenichi wondered if this woman might use it to blackmail him, though he thought she would never do that, being who she was. As the sun was setting, he asked if it wasn't time for the town gates to close, and Primula confirmed it. Confused, the man wanted to know where she planned to sleep that night, so she asked if he would let a woman like her sleep in the woods. He pointed out that he only had one bed, but Primula, of course, saw no issue with this, since she was used to sleeping piled up with a bunch of men on long shopping trips. Hearing this, Kenichi was speechless. While the girl asked what that thing with water was, Kenichi explained that it was a bathtub, and Primula had a great idea. When night fell, she stripped down and bathed to the sound of nocturnal birds. But instead of being relaxing, she became frightened and called out to Kenichi, who was nearby. He approached and suggested she might try bathing some other time since she was scared, but she reminded him that the motto of the Mallow Company was, "Never let an opportunity pass." So Kenichi wondered what Primula would do if he were a bad person, but she didn't think a guy who saves animals and feeds beastmen could be bad. At bedtime, Primula emerged from the bath and was amazed by the bathrobe the house owner had offered, so much so that she even asked him to produce more to sell. Then she also loved the nightgown, and given all the fantastic products this man had, she imagined that one day he might become the greatest merchant in all of Dahlia, if not the entire kingdom of Kaden. However, Kenichi wanted none of that. He thought attracting the attention of nobles only brought trouble, when all he wanted was enough to live a quiet life. Therefore, Primula promised never to mention her supplier's name to the nobles. Kenichi thanked her for her consideration and finished a drawing he was doing of his friend. Later, already lying in her bed, Primula tried to call Kenichi and ask if he was already asleep, while the man pretended to be just to keep things cool. Meanwhile, in a remote region, Shiva was being served by the little girl with purple hair who was being used as a servant. Another man arrives, pushing the child to the ground and handing a bag to the leader, who opens it and sees several gold coins and a letter assigning him a task. When dawn broke, Kenichi took Primula home and thought about the excuse he would give her father upon arrival. However, once there, Mr. Mallow himself apologized for his daughter's behavior and said he didn't know who she took after. In turn, the girl assured she took after her father. As they discussed business at this meeting, Mallow saw Kenichi's bathrobes and nightgowns, which also included some sexy lingerie capable of winning the heart of even the most puritanical man. Mallow was embarrassed to see this business in front of him, while his daughter fell in love with the outfit. In the meantime, the maid Margaret arrived with some accounting books that the boss had requested. Kenichi remarked that it was to be expected of so many ledgers from a great merchant, but Mallow mentioned that the accounting system had changed, so he was having to rewrite everything because the neighboring empire had invented a system known as double-entry bookkeeping. Hearing these words, Kenichi was astonished, as that existed in his old world. According to Mallow, this new rule spread quickly thanks to its creator. Then Mallow also showed interest in the bathtub that Primula mentioned, so Kenichi took the opportunity to show a product prototype outside. Arriving there, Mallow introduced a clay pump, another product that was spreading rapidly across the empire. Kenichi, of course, knew well where the inspiration came from, and it was too much of a coincidence that this was happening right after the start of double entry bookkeeping. In other words, Kenichi thought there was someone for his world around. Frustrated with this, he showed the Mallows a drawing of a bicycle that he was inventing named Dracena, but the two laughed at him, thinking that this odd thing was some kind of joke. After that day, Primula began visiting Kenichi more frequently. Tonight, she informed him she would be away for a month starting tomorrow. Kenichi asked if it wouldn't have been better for her to have slept at home, but Primula wanted to try out that lingerie the man had mentioned at the meeting. Kenichi asked if the girl was trying to win someone over. Then she admitted that this man was right in front of her. He couldn't understand how a young and beautiful woman like her could be attracted to an old man like him. But Primula thought he was incredible, and besides, her father wouldn't mind. Confused by this revelation, Kenichi asked for time to absorb the information, as something like this involved a lot of responsibility. Thus, Primula asked if they could at least share the same bed, and the man agreed, but only for sleeping. Later, while she was already asleep, he wondered what Primula saw in a guy like him. The next morning, the woman returned to town, so Kenichi was left alone at home, at least for a few seconds, because that armored warrior had just appeared at his fence. He introduced himself as Norseball and said he had been investigating rumors that a suspicious man had begun living in the forest. Then he found out now that it was just Kenichi. That said, Norseball asked what the heck those gadgets were. Since he couldn't call the gadgets solar panels, Kenichi tried to explain that it was something related to magic, meaning now another person had to keep the secret that he was in fact a mage. In this case, Norseball went a bit further and asked for a little favor, and Kenichi understood that he had to give up 3 steel ingots to buy his silence. Happy to have material to forge a good sword, the warrior shares that a mage with a unique magic has appeared in the Empire, capable of producing a large quantity of a yellowish sauce called mayonnaise. By the way, it's said that this guy defeated a dragon using mayonnaise. Knowing this, Kenichi realizes that this mage who has reincarnated in this world is really pushing the boundaries. 1 month later in the city market, Kenichi was waiting for the arrival of Mallow's caravan as usual, when he noticed some people stirring about an attack that had occurred. When Margaret herself arrives to tell what happened, he finds out that things are serious. Kenichi made his way through the crowded throng where Mr. Mallow was on his knees, pleading with adventurers to rescue his daughter, but the men refused to confront someone like Shaga. Some locals informed the businessman that the guild would need a few more days to organize the preparations for an expedition, but he was desperate and couldn't wait. Shaga's route consisted of 50 henchmen, so few would dare confront such a formidable gang. Meanwhile, the bandit leader threw Primula into a cell but noticed she hadn't shed a single tear, which was expected from the daughter of a major company. Shaga remarked that Primula was so beautiful it left men drooling, so at least one sleazy noble would take very good care of her during her stay. Back to Mallow, he finally reached Kenichi with his plea, begging on his knees for his girl to be saved. At that moment, the man remembered the times he had spent with his wife and impulsively said he would help. As soon as he said this, Kenichi knew he should have thought it through better because this was a real war situation, and he was just an amateur. Yet, if he did nothing, who knew what could happen to Primula? Moreover, he now had the Shangri-La, which would be a great help. Speaking of which, Kenichi asked for money in advance to make the preparations, and Mallow handed over 10 million yen without a second thought, approximately 383,000 reis. Then Kenichi learned that Shaga's base was 50 kilometers south of Dahlia, in the ruins of an ancient castle in the mountains, meaning he would need a vehicle. After choosing one in the virtual store, he announced to all present that he was about to use summoning magic for something huge, so everyone should make room. With that, Kenichi dropped a Yatsubishi Gallop truck in the middle of the square and told the people that this iron carriage could do everything he commanded without horses, and he would carry all who joined this fight, providing the best weapons for those who boarded. He also mentioned the hefty reward for Shaga's head, making this a chance for those who wanted to get rich. However, despite the merchant's efforts to persuade people to board, no one dared confront Shaga. For a moment, Kenichi found himself alone on this impossible mission, until he heard a meow in the crowd. It was the lynx with a pigeon in her mouth who climbed directly onto the truck, showing she was willing to accompany the man who had saved her a month ago. Along with her, another feline showed up to join the convoy, Miley, accompanied by her partners Nakuro, Nyamelo, and Mayanji. Soon, Miley received a state-of-the-art composite bow and admitted she never imagined seeing something so well made. The other members of the beast folk were also gifted with modern blades, much lighter, more practical, and durable than they were used to. Norseball then appeared to join the group with his latest sword crafted from resources provided by Kenichi, the Great Wolf Fang. According to the knight, hunting Shaga would be a worthy first battle for his sword to gorge on the blood of those villains. Kenichi found this a bit scary but didn't object to the man's presence on the truck. Then the old tool shop owner came forward to join the team. Kenichi warned that it was too risky for an elderly man, but the old adventurer demonstrated he still had a lot of fight left in him by summoning a powerful fireball on the ground. Lastly, even Anama showed up to climb on the truck, arguing it was cruel to leave her out. Kenichi reminded her it would be a bloody fight, but she insisted she could at least prepare the food, promising to run if things got too hot near her. With that, Kenichi pulled the woman onto the vehicle. After this, he asked again who else would join the group to face Shaga, but as he repeated the announcement, people definitively left until no one else remained. When Kenichi realized the group was formed, Malo asked to come along, but the merchant said the man should tend to his wounds first and save a beautiful smile for when his daughter returned home safe and sound. With that settled, Kenichi went to the Adventurers Guild and accepted the mission to hunt Shaga, also paying a silver coin to register with the guild. Afterward, he departed with his companions towards their goal, leaving the incredulous crowd behind as no one imagined such a small group would actually confront the most dangerous bandit in the region. Some even accused the group of running off with Malo's money without carrying out the mission, but despite the scorn, Kenichi and the others left to do what they had truly joined to do. After all, as he said, there comes a time when man must fight, even knowing he might lose. Actually, it was some old pirate who said that, but Kenichi liked the phrase. Meanwhile, Primula saw the door of her cell open, and a young girl with purple hair entered with bread to offer her. Seeing the little girl's belly rumbling, the woman let her eat the food, and although she initially insisted Primula keep it, the girl didn't press too hard as she was genuinely hungry and soon attacked the bread eagerly. Noticing that the little one was also a prisoner, Primula said they would leave together because help would surely come. The girl asked if it would be God's help, and Primula said yes, even though she was taken by surprise. Returning to the train responsible for the rescue, they continue their journey aboard the truck until they camp at the end of the afternoon. Kenichi prepares a soup of vegetables and rabbit meat with horns, and everyone is pleased with the quality of the food. However, the beast folk seem also interested in the cat food Kenichi bought for the lynx, so the merchant makes an exception and lets them try the cat food. Amidst this, even the old mage of the group joined in and gulped down the cat food. After the meal, Kenichi explains the strategy he wants to use. Morseball and the mage fully agree. The beasts admit they're not good at using their brains, so they leave that part to the others. Lastly, Anama says she will stay at the camp because she wouldn't be useful in battle. Soon, using a modern low-power communicator, Miley is terrified when she discovers Liv how the device works, as she simply heard Kenichi's voice through the gadget and has no idea how on earth that is possible. After the initial shock, she informs that they are close to arriving. The mage comments to Kenichi that not even the Empire's sorcerers possess magical devices like these, and the merchant asks him to just pretend he saw nothing. Afterward, he gets into the truck to head to the castle and states that he is counting on Anama. In turn, she repeats her role before they depart. If the group doesn't return in a day, she will have to go back to the guild and report that the mission failed. Finally, the truck leaves to start the crucial part of the plan. In the middle of the night, Kenichi asks through the communicator what Miley is seeing, and she reports that the wall has watchtowers with guards, but the men are getting drunk. Given this, the invading group thinks it's the ideal moment to attack and prepares for it, while Kenichi receives from the beast folk a battle snack similar to a chestnut. When he bites into it, he tastes an extremely bitter flavor, and when the effect hits, the man goes completely loopy for a moment. Even though he was about to face death, he simply couldn't stop laughing. When driving towards the enemy castle, the man felt like he was in a game of Mario Kart, where everything was flowers and nothing could stop him. Meanwhile, in the castle, the men who could stop Kenichi keep drinking around their bonfires. In the castle cells, a somber aspect sets the pace of the environment. Outside, Miley points her bow and remembers Kenichi's instructions. She will be the first to act to eliminate the guards. In the midst of this, the two gate guards notice the glow of the truck's headlights approaching and think it's some kind of monster, until arrows pierce their skulls and their lives instantly. Having done that, Miley returns to the truck, and they head to the main door. As agreed earlier, the old mage took responsibility for dealing with the entrance, so he casts an explosion spell that definitively destroys the gate, ensuring the vehicle's passage. As planned in the meeting before the attack, the convoy would attack while the enemies were drinking, as they would be drunk and without armor. When the truck enters the castle, the allies ask the sorcerer to cast another spell like the first, but he warns that he can't do any more for today. One way or another, the fighters descend from the vehicle and initiate the attack, catching the bandits completely unprepared. Now, although the beasts and Morseball were indeed formidable warriors, Kenichi was like a blind man in a shootout and didn't know how to act. Amid this, a thug comes up behind him with a knife, but the lynx manages to knock the man down in time, allowing Miley to finish him off with an arrow. At that moment, a large number of men emerge from inside the ruins with all their fury, making the invaders apprehensive, except for Kenichi, of course, who was protected by the effect of the dubious nut. As if he were playing a video game, he summons his backhoe and leaves the bandits unresponsive, even more so when he turns on the vehicle's spotlight and charges at the men. The beast folk take advantage of this moment of hesitation to resume the attack, along with Norseball, who demonstrates great skill by easily defeating the opponents with his wolf fan. Amidst all this, Kenichi uses his bulldozer mercilessly and breaks down the walls of the ruins in search of the cell where Primula is. At one point, he hears screams coming from the other side of the breach, and seeing that intense light coming out of the hole, the purple-haired girl thinks she is facing God. Meanwhile, Kenichi doesn't see Primula anywhere and becomes even more worried. At that instant, Shaga appears holding a woman hostage, thinking they had come to rescue the noble. To show he's not messing around, the villain tears part of the woman's clothing and tells her that if he had known things would come to this, he would have had his fun with her before. Amid this, without showing what he's doing, Kenichi asks Miley to notice where he's pointing the laser sight on Shaga. Even without looking, the cat swings her ears to stimulate her senses. Kenichi explains that he's going to blind the thug with this light, so the archer will take him down with her bow. As said, Kenichi points the laser at Shaga's eye, who drops Primula. At the same moment, Miley shoots the target in the shoulder, giving time for the hostage to flee into Kenichi's arms. The thug doesn't let it go and prepares to throw his sword, but some mysterious wind blows him away, leaving him face to face with Miley, who has her bow pointed at him once more. The humanoid cat promises she won't miss this time and fulfills her oath by hitting the leader's forehead. Primula continues running until she actually reaches Kenichi and hugs him. Perhaps because of the nut, the man feels a tremendous urge to grab the girl right there, but does everything to hold back his impulses. After the rescue, Nyanji rushes back to the camp to inform Anama of the mission's success. Kenichi bought clothes for the captive women and arranged for them all to have a bath. Moreover, for the girl with purple hair, he gave Primula a pair of scissors to cut the child's hair. Delighted with the scissors, the woman forgets her predicament and asks if she could sell these in her company. Then, realizing her towel had fallen, she runs off embarrassed. After bathing and dressing, the youngest girl introduces herself as Anemone and presents a letter sent by the dishonorable noble Shaga mentioned, who was responsible for the kidnapping. When the group returns to the camp, Anama cries with relief upon seeing everyone safe, as if Sinol was lost. Noticing a child among them, she remarks that her own daughter would have been the same age had she still been alive. Kenichi didn't know his friend had a daughter, and she explains that tragically, the girl died during epidemic. Soon, the freed women are put to bed, as the group plans to return to Dahlia in the morning. They still have the grim task of disposing of the bandits' bodies ahead, but, exhausted, Kenichi falls asleep next to Primula and Anemone. The next day, he drives the group back to town in his car, and seeing his daughter get out of the vehicle, Mallow is moved as he rushes to embrace Primula. As a savvy businessman, he comments on the high quality of the girl's blouse, leading them both to excitedly agree that it could sell well in his store. Kenichi finds it odd that their heartfelt reunion morphs into a business meeting until Mallow personally thanks him for what he has done. Meanwhile, the businessman asks if Kenichi placed the mission's spoils in the item box, and Kenichi confirms, embarrassed, that yes, after all, his box is carrying an absurd amount of junk. The day before, while the people were eating, Kenichi learned that the heads of the slain enemies should be placed separately in the item box as proof of their defeat, identifying the wanted individuals. The beasts make it clear that this is common practice among adventurers, so Kenichi had better get used to it, especially since the heads start to stink after a while and one must be prepared. Hearing this, Kenichi realizes that this world is no joke, and speaking of jokes, his life of leisure and peace seems to be going downhill with this less than charming news. Eventually, he gathered all the weapons and armor taken from the bandits, and there were about 100 gold coins in the stash, plus carpets, drinks, jewels, and everything else you can think of. Everything went into the item box. After collecting the items, the protagonist offers to take the freed prisoners back to their homeland, but none of them want that since their families were killed and they would have nowhere to stay. Therefore, Kenichi suggests they go to Dahlia with him, as it is a city with many people where they could look for work and try to start anew. Primula adds that the Mallow Company could help them, and this offer sways the women. Kenichi asks where Anemone Village is, and she replies she was born in Europe. Unfortunately, Primula tells him it's quite far, about 800 kilometers away. Nonetheless, Kenichi offers to take the girl, but she shakes her head no. Anama argues that the child must have been sold to reduce the number of mouths to feed, so Kenichi invites her to go to Dahlia with everyone. Thus, the man begins transporting everyone to their respective places, each where they want to be left. During a conversation among the women on a meal night at the camp, Anama says that the best quality in a man is his honesty. Pringula asks if Kenichi would be a good choice, but the elder says no, as men like him do not care about women. If he finds something he really wants to do, he will definitely leave a woman behind to pursue it. Kenichi overhears this part of the conversation with a stern look but remains silent. Finally, the next day, the journey continues and the former prisoners reunite with their families, those who still have someone. Upon arriving in Dahlia, the guild receptionist panics upon seeing Shaga's head displayed before her by the beast people. Another employee comes over and asks how many heads the adventurers have, and Kenichi answers that there are 52, shocking everyone. Later, as the guild members start examining the heads, Kenichi steps aside to catch his breath, but the wizard comes over and remarks that the young man's magic is exceptional, as is his item box, which will certainly complicate his life if the nobles discover what he can do. About this, Kenichi remembers that as long as everyone keeps quiet, everything will be fine, and if things get ugly, he'll leave right away. At this moment, Norseball arrives and announces that he's about to see the local lord, Count Asclepius. Kenichi asks if he will report that nobles were involved with Shaga, and the knight confirms. The inspection of the heads lasts until dusk, and the total payment is 861 gold coins. After receiving a sheet with some reward for the service provided, Hanama returns it, feeling she did nothing to deserve it. In truth, she would like to take care of Anemone because of what happened to her son, and Kenichi understands the woman's need to have someone to look after, so he gives her that responsibility. As they leave the guild, Kenichi sees the people celebrating in the streets the fact that Shaga was killed, along with the true responsibles for the successful expedition, such as the Beast People. Speaking of them, since Anama refused the reward, Kenichi divided it among the other 7 members of the group, so it was 123 gold coins each. Kenichi goes to the Lynx and gives her some food, saying he decided to spend the night in the city as the gates close at that hour. To make the most of the night, he heads to the Azalea Tavern, where a woman sings about someone who opened the gates of hell. Azalea is thrilled to reunite with her friend and asks if it's true that he defeated a band of bandits. Seeing that the entire clientele is watching this conversation, the man denies it was him and pretends the woman got the wrong person. Internally, Kenichi thinks that if he told Azalea it was him, she would take the reward from him before he received it. Amidst this, the musician starts singing about a group of catmen led by the Lynx, while the tavern owner reminds Kenichi of the promise he made that they would be lovers when he succeeded in business. Kenichi is impressed by the woman's intuition going full throttle, since he never said anything about having made a lot of money, so he argues he never made such a promise. In tears, the woman shouts that she was just a fling to this man, while the customers remind her that she's there to work, as one of them has an empty mug. Meanwhile, Kenichi doesn't take the drama seriously and jokes that he is indeed a no-good adult. As he climbs the stairs to use his lodging room, the protagonist reflects that it's only a matter of time until the nobles learn about him. In the middle of the night, while Kenichi sleeps, a girl passes by the Lynx without any trouble and makes her way through the hallway into the man's room. When Kenichi sees Azalea's face under his blanket, he complains that he's too tired for these games, but the woman isn't looking for excuses. Since it's been a while since they last met, she thought they could have a bit of fun. As she speaks, Azalea shamelessly strips off her clothes until the couple realizes that Anemone has burst into the room, watching them along with the Lynx. In the end, it's the little girl and the feline who end up sleeping with Kenichi. The next day, Kenichi thinks that Anama might be worried about the child, so he goes to the market to look for her, but the woman isn't there. The catmen are hungover and have no idea where the merchant might be, so Kenichi decides to take care of some tasks, such as selling equipment taken from bandits, which nets him 32 gold coins. He then sells items from Shadmet to the Mallow Company for 35 coins, and later, after selling furniture and boughs at the old man's tool shop, he earns another 22 gold coins. Altogether, this earns him 17,800,000 yen. Divided among the 7 members of the expedition team, each will receive 12 coins. Kenichi decides to give a portion to Anama and the women who chose to stay in Dahlia. After dining with the Beastmen, Kenichi takes Anemone back to his place alongside the Lynx, where Anama is extremely worried. Later, while having tea, the little girl confesses that she wants to stay with Kenichi. Sadly, Anama suggests she could teach the girl how to run a business so that she wouldn't feel lonely as they would live together, but the little girl insists she wants to live with the man. In the late afternoon, Anama leaves in a carriage headed for the city, and Kenichi has serious doubts about whether this will work out. On his way home, he asks Anemone why she wants to live with him, and she replies that it's because he feeds her until she's full. Accepting that, Kenichi serves dinner and delights the girl with a delicious meal, making him happy to see that she enjoys his cooking. Later, Kenichi is about to take a bath, and the little girl insists they bathe together. When it's time to sleep, the child wants to sleep next to him. Honestly, Kenichi finds it curious that he has suddenly found himself with an adoptive daughter, but things have moved too fast, and he's just going along with the flow. However, not everything is rosy. While the pseudo-father and daughter sleep, a group of hooded figures approaches the yard of the house. In the following scene, Kenichi has a brief nightmare about his grueling days in the office in his past life, waking up panting in his bed. 15 days later, the Knight Morsbald is awarded the title of Baron for defeating Shaga, taking over a small territory and beginning to recruit people to live there, and is also on the lookout for a wife. Meanwhile, some townspeople have their nobility titles revoked for having hired Shaba to kidnap Primula. Ironically, while strolling through the town, Anemone sees a Drazina being used by a resident, and Kenichi recalls how the Mallows laughed at him when he first presented the project, but the clever ones ended up using the idea. They even apologized for laughing at the foreigner and paid him 5 gold coins for the idea since, according to Mallow, one of the company's mottos is to always show gratitude for an idea. After the meeting, as they leave the company, the hooded figures continue to tail Kenichi and Anemone. When the review is complete, the group collects the reward and divides it equally once again. Kenichi returns the money he borrowed from Mallow to prepare for the mission, and then distributes a portion among the women he rescued. As for Anama, she accepts at least 1 gold coin and even gives a fruit as a gift to Anemone. Wherever he goes, Kenichi feels like he's being followed, and this becomes even more evident when he notices a hooded man right behind him. Realizing this, he grabs Anemone by the arm and takes off, but the hooded figures manage to corner them. With no safe place to go, Kenichi risks an alley and throws wooden boxes along the way to try to buy time. However, at a certain point in the journey, a carriage blocks the alley's exit, leaving him with no escape, so he surrenders. The hooded figures open the carriage door and inform him that their employer wants to have a word with the merchant, but before entering the vehicle, Kenichi summons Dynamax from his inventory and throws them around, including into the carriage. Amidst the chaos, he manages to create distance and aims his crossbow at the pursuers, who flee in panic. Just then, Mallow arrives by carriage and asks what happened. Kenichi gets in with his adoptive daughter and explains that the whole situation must be the work of some noble, and Mallow believes it was the anti-monarchist faction, thus suggesting that Kenichi visit the lord of this city, Lord Asclepius. At night, as the foreign merchant heads home, Mallow talks to his daughter about the great debt they owe to Kenichi, as they were honored by the city lord for having invented the Drazina, even earning an honorary surname for this achievement. For example, Primula is now called Primula ni Drazina. The next day, alone in her room, the woman recalls that at first she only saw Kenichi as a bland middle-aged man, but soon recognized his great talent and personality. For this reason, Primula did everything to catch that man's attention, but nothing worked. Still, because he had gone to save her from the bandits, the woman was sure that this man felt something for her. Therefore, Primula decided to invest even more in Kenichi, as she's certain he's waiting for her. Excited, she runs to the man's house to tell him everything she feels, but when she gets there, she cries upon seeing that his house has disappeared. She remembers what Anama said about Kenichi being someone who doesn't settle down because of a woman. Meanwhile, Kenichi encounters Fuyu on a motorcycle and the two have a chat. Fuyu asks where he's headed. Kenichi recalls the whole hustle of getting there by motorcycle with Anemone and the Lynx. He had stored his house and everything he could around it, and then he finally left for good. Remembering this, he tells Fuyu that he's embarking on a journey with no set destination with his family in search of the peaceful life he has long dreamed of. In their quest for new land, the group stops to grab a bite, and Kenichi prepares a freshly caught fish for a meal. At the moment, they are 100 kilometers from Dahlia, and about 6 kilometers from the next town, Estrantia. After finishing the fish cake soup, the man serves his chosen family and thinks to himself that this is indeed the life he always wanted. Mid-lunch, during a reflective moment, Kenichi recalls Anemone mentioning she is 12 years old, but she seems too small for her age. After eating, he launches a drone and discovers that the river where they stop flows into a lake. It seems Estrantia is beyond this lake, so he invites the little girl to search for a spot there with a good view. Once there, the child and the lynx have fun in the water like never before. From Anemone's side, she always prayed to God for salvation. Throughout her tough life journey, she even shed some tears. After all, she is just a little girl. However, now she is on a new adventure with her god and savior, Kenichi. After a great outing at the lake, Kenichi asks Anemone what she thinks about living there, and the girl is immediately excited. Thus, he conjures his wooden house once again and prepares for a new life. Watching the child hug the lynx affectionately, the adult realizes he has never named the feline, then suggests names like Kuro, Black, or Tom, but neither are to their liking. Thinking it over, he considers the animal's fur and decides on Velvet, which means velvet in Portuguese. Right then, he decides a good nickname for the lynx would be Vel, and both love it. At night, the child writes her own name without needing help, and Kenichi celebrates her learning to read and write. Eventually, he checks and finds that the Shangri-La store doesn't sell diesel, so he uses kerosene for now, but would love to find a cheaper fuel. Once he saw on TV about biodiesel made from used cooking oil, so he buys some books to study the topic. Lying in his bed researching this method, Kenichi sees Anemone entering his room and taking an interest in the reading, even though she doesn't understand it. Kenichi explains that the book is not in this country's language, meaning the girl couldn't read it, but she says she could learn the language spoken in the man's country. With that, Kenichi buys a copy of The Little Mermaid and lets the girl learn some Japanese words on her own. The next day, while removing camouflage from his solar panel since it was sunny, Kenichi hears a noise in the bushes and, fearing it might be a monster, quickly buys a crossbow to handle the situation. However, Miley jumps out of the bushes with a bow on her back and yells that she finally found her friend. Right away, she complains about being left behind and having a hard time following the scent of the lynx and the carriage. Then Miley enters the wooden house and Anemone is happy to see her friend, and Kenichi informs that the Catwoman will live with them from now on. At lunch, Kenichi asks if Dahlia is still the same since he left, and the Catwoman says that Morseball proposed to Primula, and Kenichi imagines that this is the typical marriage for status. Honestly, he wished he had attended the ceremony. Later, the residents of the house take a bath to clean up and relax, and Miley discovers the wonders of a hairdryer, which in her case works for her whole body. The following day, she and Anemone keep an eye on the Little Mermaid book, and the cat finds the illustrations very explanatory. Listening to the conversation, Kenichi learns that even without knowing how to read, if it's an illustrated book, people can understand the story. So he thinks it might be a good idea to produce illustrated books about fairy tales from his world, but first he decides to ask the girls if there are some in their world. Right away, Miley mentions the Antique Queen and the Holy Knight, for example. Anemone adds the tale, The Forest Elf, and Kenichi shows more interest in the latter, so he asks the little girl to tell the story for him to note down. Anemone tells about an elf who lived in a forest and fell in love with a human prince, but all people from both races were against their union, and the elf nearly dies in a conflict that starts because of this. However, thanks to the power of the fairies, she escapes to a safe place, and the two live happily ever after in the depths of the forest. After noting each part of the story, Kenichi buys a mimeograph printing kit and puts into practice his plan to build books based on local tales, leaving Anemone and Miele amazed when they see in front of them a book ready with a story they've heard all their lives, something completely new for both. Suddenly, Kenichi notices a canoe approaching the riverbank, with a human and a beast man inside. Quickly, he tells the girls to go inside the house as there are people approaching and it's uncertain if they pose any threat. To defend his territory, Kenichi approaches the invaders with his crossbow at hand, but the man from the canoe explains that they are residents of Santanka, the village on the other side of the lake. Kenichi asks if there's any law preventing him from living there or anything of the sort, and the man replies that yes, but only if there are bandits in the area, so they came to check. Moreover, he observes that the intruder seems well armed, so Kenichi explains that he is a merchant who had trouble in his town and had to flee. At that moment, Velvet comes to caress her owner. Then the Beastman is surprised to see a large lynx so comfortable with a human, which means it's impossible for him to be someone bad. Thus, the human from the canoe trusts his partner's word and introduces himself as Crouton, while the Beastman is named Naanius. Next, Kenichi takes the two to the backyard of his house, where Crouton says he worked for the kingdom of Estrantia, thus he ends up taking care of these matters. Naanius sees the girls inside the house and comments to his partner that there seems to be no problem around, so the human agrees and apologizes for the inconvenience. Putting that aside, he sees the books produced by Kenichi and asks if they are for sale. Later, during a meal, Miley asks if the homeowner has sold his books yet, and he replies that Croven has a daughter Anemone's age. After the meal, while Anemone stays home reading, Kenichi heads to the forest and stores medicinal plants in his inventory. Miley arrives and hugs the man from behind, whispering that Anemone is not around. Seeing that the cat was hinting at something, the human asks if she is in heat. In the following days, Kenichi builds an external shed and begins synthesizing biodiesel inside it. Wearing his hazardous material protection suit, the Japanese man feels such intense heat that occasionally he has to throw everything up in the air and jump into the lake to cool off. It was a dangerous job involving a deadly toxin, but if successful, Kenichi could create a much cheaper fuel. On one hand, expectations were high and he was very focused on this, but on the other, there was a certain little girl who was sulking because she hadn't been getting much attention lately. As if out of nowhere, Kenichi approaches the child and invites her to make a new illustrated book. Getting no response, he mentions thinking about going to Estrantia and invites his adopted daughter. Miley appears at that moment and accepts the invitation, even though she wasn't invited, so Anemone decides to join in. Since Miley had been to this city many times, she was responsible for showing the way while Kenichi and Anemone rode a motorcycle. Since they couldn't take the direct road there, they had to make a 10 kilometers detour. Upon arrival, Kenichi heads to the local adventurers guild and is greeted by a staff member who caught attention due to her extravagant physical attributes. After regaining his composure, the man informs that he wants to register at the guild. The woman asks for identification, so he shows the item that proves he is registered in the Merchants Guild and the Adventurers Guild in Dahlia. Miley, also wanting to register there, says she is a formal adventurer in Dahlia. After evaluating the man's ID, the receptionist apologizes upon discovering she's speaking to Kenichi Hamada, who defeated the feared Shada, but he asks the woman not to speak loudly to maintain his privacy. Amidst this, Anemone shouts that Kenichi is the strongest god that exists, leaving the man even more embarrassed. Regardless, the receptionist says the cost to register at the guild is 1 silver coin. After registration, the group heads to the street market of Estrantia, and Kenichi reflects that in this world, it's common just to boil vegetables and meats and put them in the soup without a base broth. Hence, he understands why Anemone and Miley are giving that unfriendly look without his special seasoning. Knowing this, he buys a bonito fish broth for the two to remember what real food is like. Amidst this, he notices 2 suspicious men looking for someone, while Cruton enters a dark alley with his daughter. Putting that aside for the moment, he continues his stroll through the market with the girls until they find a tool store called Snowflake. Miley mentions that it belongs to the old mage, and smelling treasures, the man decides to enter. Inside, the mage was at the counter and welcomes the customers, while commenting that she had never seen them there before. Kenichi replies that he came from Dahlia, but ends up calling the woman Granny accidentally, which clearly offends the lady. Realizing this, he almost calls her the same way again when asking about a tool, but corrects himself before repeating the mistake. Then the shopkeeper demonstrates the tool's function by pouring water into one container and wine into another. After a reaction from the tool, the 2 liquids are poured separately into 2 mugs. Kenichi tastes the wine and notes that the alcohol content strangely increased. After a closer inspection, he asks if the tool separates certain substances from what is on top. The mage replies that this is a magical item that extracts the liquid placed in the front plate and discharges the rest from the bottom. At that moment, Kenichi realizes that he can produce biodiesel without any chemicals if he uses this gadget, so he buys the item for 5 gold coins. Then Anemone appears with a grimoire in hand, and Kenichi is excited to ask if this thing allows you to use magic by reading. Startled by the man's behavior, the lady explains that this won't be possible for those who have no magical power, but Kenichi is willing to take the risk and buys the book for 10 gold coins. He was eager to take it home, but the mage explains that grimoires need to be registered first, so the buyer must return in a week. As they leave the store, they encounter Nyanias on the way, but the beast was in a hurry and runs off with a bag on his back. With that, Kenichi gets worried and feels that he should head home as soon as possible. By the way, in some alley, he sees those 2 suspicious men from the market telling each other that they found who they were looking for. Soon after, a child screams, and Kenichi sees Crouton with his daughter being threatened by armed bandits. Hesitating to get involved for a while, Kenichi knows he hates getting into trouble, but when Anemone asks if he's not going to do something, he realizes he has no way out at this moment. Then he asks Miley to take care of the child, but if things get ugly, she should lend a hand. Thus, the man buys a medieval plague doctor mask from the online store and heads into the fray. As he approaches the bandits, he uses the item to scare them, claiming to be a wizard full of tricks. Saying that, he grabs several firecrackers and explodes them in the path of the thugs, forcing them to flee. After that, Nyanias arrives and apologizes for only appearing now, explaining that he fell into the bandits' trap and ended up getting separated from his friend and his daughter. Later, Cruton explains that the armed men were from the Spice Syndicate, and Kenichi recalls that this syndicate in Dahlia is called Bacopa. Cruton adds that when he worked for the kingdom, he arrested a bunch of them, which marked him as a target. Then he explains to his daughter that this was the man who sold him the storybook, and the girl excitedly thanks him, having loved the story. Anemone shares that she helped make the book and asked to create a new story with Crouton's daughter, who showed great interest in doing so. Thus, the two introduce themselves and become friends, something that pleases Kenichi, as it's always good to see a child making their first friend of the same age. A few days later, Anemone eagerly awaits the arrival of Mary, who approaches by canoe with her parents and Nyanias for a visit. Kenichi had prepared a feast for the arrival of the new friends, who are amazed by the spices the foreigner used in his food. Afterwards, they spend the entire day having fun, especially the children, until the late afternoon comes along with time to leave. After that, Mary and Anemone begin to visit each other every day, and Kenichi also gets to know the village of Santanka, where Cruton's daughter lives with her family. The two girls start working on an illustrated Cinderella story until one day, something happens. Barely able to breathe, Cruton arrives at Kenichi's house with a huge sack full of coins, stating they are all his savings. According to him, Mary is suffering from a high fever, and he hopes to buy any medicine from the merchant that works. It appears to be a region-specific disease, and most children who contract it don't survive even a full day. Hearing this, Anemone hugs her father in desperation and mildly remembers that the mage from Astrantia might be able to use some healing spell. Unfortunately, Crouton laments that he doesn't have the money to request such a service. So first of all, Kenichi buys medicine to reduce the fever and sends Crouton back to his village with all his money, promising that he will be there soon. Having done this, he leaves Miley to take care of Anemone and sets off on his motorcycle. At night, in the village of Santanka, the mage says that Mary has chicory fever, which is very difficult to cure with magic. According to her, a white flower called chicory blooms at the bottom of the forest at the spring that is the source of the river that runs through the village, and this fever can only be treated with its seeds. Thus, Kenichi, Crouton, and Nyanias decide to set off in search of the cure, needing to return by at the latest tomorrow morning. However, as soon as the men leave, we see that the town's bandits have found Crouton's house and were lying in wait. Regardless, despite the dangers left behind, unaware of the ongoing misfortune, the group sent to find the cure presses forward toward the spring indicated by the doctor. Kenichi parks his motorcycle while Nyanias hears someone approaching. Quickly, Kenichi draws his crossbow and aims at the source of the noise, but it was just the lynx emerging from the depths of the forest darkness with all its charm. After relieving himself, the feline's owner strokes her for a moment and buys an inflatable boat to cross the river. At one point, he finds the plant mentioned by the doctor and plucks one from the water to hand to Crouton, who is immensely grateful for the chance to save his daughter. However, not everything goes as planned. A large group of black wolves surrounds the explorers, and Kenichi believes these beasts are seeking revenge. Nonetheless, he won't back down at this moment, so he summons two swords to hand to his comrades. He then tells them he will keep the wolves busy, while Crouton must return to Mary immediately. Both the man and Nyanias are outraged at the thought of leaving their partner behind, but as Kenichi lights his firecrackers, the merchant insists it is for the best. After all, Mary is in a race against time. With no chance for argument, Kenichi immediately throws the firecrackers at the wolves to drive them away, and Nyanias puts Crouton on its back and runs back to the village. The problem is that some wolves chased them and encircled them, making Kenichi think that Crouton is the target for some reason. Meanwhile, the henchmen who were after Crouton hide in the woods and vow to make the man pay for what he did, while a dog man seems to control the wolves with a flute. In the midst of the conflict, Nyanias and his partner are violently attacked, but defend themselves with the swords, frustrating the bandits who had hoped for an easy surprise victory. To make matters worse for them, Velvet pounces and knocks down the two men and also climbs the tree where the dog man is and takes his flute. Because of the change in the behavior of the black wolves, Kenichi realizes that the humanoid dog controlled the pack with his instrument, so he orders Nyanias to carry Crouton away as quickly as possible. The dog man manages to free himself from Velvet and goes back to controlling the wolves, but Kenichi believes that a cat man running at full speed will leave the lupines behind. However, for some reason, the black wolves stopped obeying the bandits' commands. At that moment, footsteps so heavy that they shook the ground around the entire territory could be heard as a gigantic beast approached and scared all the wolves away. Without delay, the bear-like creature quickly closed in and delivered a powerful blow to the dogman, severely injuring him as he was thrown far away. At the same time, the two henchmen ran off, and the giant beast turned its attention to Kenichi and Velvet, who was staring down the bear. Seeing the creature running towards him despite being terrified, Kenichi manages to summon the beast and shoots it in the eye. Velvet takes the opportunity to attack next and manages to cause some damage, and her above-average agility allows the lynx to come out unscathed from this assault. Relieved, Kenichi now throws a large number of firecrackers at the bear, which, incredibly, thought it would be a good idea to bite these fireworks, which violently explode in its mouth, leaving Kenichi simply stunned by witnessing this unexpected scene. Thus, he summons his backhoe, spins 360 degrees, and drops the bucket on the creature's skull, ending the conflict. After confirming the victory, the human heads directly towards the fallen dogman. Later, he arrives by motorcycle at Crouton's house, where Mary is still lying in bed. However, the doctor states that the worst is over. The child's father thanks his friend again, as does the mother. Not being the type of guy who is used to this kind of attention, Kenichi is unsure of exactly what to say, so he decides to have a chat with Crouton outside the house. Once there, he shares that he made a trade with the dogman from the forest. Earlier, having saved the humanoid, Kenichi asked him to promise never to harm Crouton's family again. The dog swore never to repeat such violence, but reminds that he cannot be responsible for others, as many people hold a grudge against the man from Santanka village. Because of this, the bandit advises that the man should leave for good. And that was the issue Kenichi brought to Crouton, for leaving Santanka could save his family. The problem is that he has nowhere to go, since even moving to Dahlia is out of the question, considering Zareta is linked to Bacopa from that city. Thus, Kenichi remembers that Baron Norseball, who recently took over a territory near Dahlia, is in need of people to work on his lands. With a recommendation from Kenichi, a personal friend, Norseball would certainly be happy to welcome the new worker. For this reason, Cruton feels grateful, but would like to discuss it with his family first. The next day, back at Kenichi's house, Miley climbs on him and complains that he didn't invite her to such a cool outing, but the man argues that there wasn't time and someone needed to stay to take care of Anemone. Speaking of the child, she thanks the man for saving her great friend. A few days later, Crouton and Nyaneas left for Norseball's domain. Still recovering, Mary asks if Anemone has finished the illustrated book of Cinderella, but her friend insists on doing it with Mary only when she feels better. As the child is still not healthy, the plan was for the father to go ahead and later come back to fetch the family. In the midst of it all, Kenichi and Miley notice the presence of the dog man. As Crouton departs, he recalls how many hold a grudge against that man, but with his claws dripping blood, he assures that no one needs to worry anymore. Miley asks what he means, so Kenichi explains that the dog has fulfilled the promise he made to him. The cat scowls and declares that one can't trust the word of that mangy creature, but the dog replies that she knows nothing about his people's loyalty. With that, he leaves with his belongings. Since he can't stay in Estrantia, he will wander to the sea or wherever fate takes him. Next, Kenichi brings the monster he defeated in the forest to the guild's Skinner, who recognizes the beast as a fang bear. The trader wants the man to remove the meat and the magic stone from the bear as he plans to sell the rest. Given the size of the animal, the Skinner warns that he will only be done by late afternoon. Then Kenichi leaves the shop and, as it's still not even noon, decides to head home to wait. Meanwhile, in a nearby establishment, a hooded woman declares she's looking for someone. Kenichi, even without hearing his friend's voice, feels such a chill that he thinks he's caught a cold. Later, upon arriving home, the man prepares a mixture in the magic instrument containing alkali and alcohol, along with the esterified oil in the upper bowl. Then he adds the biodiesel he made earlier to the front bowl. In his mind, he plans for the biodiesel to accumulate there. Seeing the reaction, Anemone asks if it worked, and the man thinks it did. To be sure, he takes the fuel outside and throws it into the generator. When the machine works, he celebrates the fact that he spent only 300 yen instead of 3,000 on this new biodiesel. After that, he prepares to go out and announces to the girls that he might spend the night in town if it gets too late. Upon arriving there, he enters the old mage's shop and accidentally calls her grandma again, but quickly realizes his mistake and corrects himself. The woman hands him the grimoire that was left for registration, and Kenichi notices a stone embedded in it. She explains that it's a magic stone linked to the enchantment recorded in the book, which he needs to learn the magic, otherwise it won't be activated. In the late afternoon, the trader returns to the Skinner and receives the separated meat and magic stone from the Fang Bear, and is informed that he should collect the payment for the materials he sold at the counter. Without delay, Kenichi goes to the cashier with striking features to collect the 4 gold and 2 silver coins she appraised, while the man tries to focus on the money and not on other more sensitive areas of the place. Soon as Kenichi leaves the guild, a hooded woman sees the man walking down the street, and the proximity of the woman makes Kenichi feel that same chill again. This gives him a bad feeling, as he remembers that he prepared the girls coffee at home and left the coffee ready, but he decides it's better not to spend the night in town. It's time to go home. Amid this mental turmoil, the man is surprised by a feminine touch that grabs his wrist. The mysterious woman sinisterly claims she finally found who she was looking for, then reveals herself to be Primula. Losing her menacing demeanor, she gives him a strong hug and exclaims that his sudden disappearance was a cruel thing to do. Kenichi argues that it would have caused trouble for Mallow Company if he had been caught by nobles, but the girl thinks the company knows how to decide for itself whether it is in danger or not. Realizing that the whole crowd is watching this discussion, the man asks for them to go somewhere more private, then the woman invites him to the hotel where she's staying. Once there, the two sit down at a table, and Primula recalls that the dress Kenichi designed was what earned her family a surname. Besides that, she lists various things the trader did for her and her father, and Kenichi can hardly believe he did so much for the Mallows, feeling instead that he was more help than helping. At one point, the woman slaps the table and says that's not all. As if that weren't enough, Kenichi Hamada saved her life from the dreaded Shaga and his henchmen. Wanting to escape all this attention, Kenichi mentions he heard that Primula was about to marry Baron Norseball and gain status, but she tells him she turned down that proposal. Changing the subject, the woman mentions that both Anama and the tool shop owner were angry that Kenichi left without notice, and he admits he felt guilty for doing so, but he remembers he didn't want to cause trouble. Hearing this, Primula insists that no one would mind, so the man cuts her off to say he understands, and that she can go back and tell everyone what happened. However, she doesn't want to return unless it's with him, and if he doesn't want to return, she won't either. Frustrated, Kenichi is surprised to have been found in Astrantia, and Primula reveals that she checked at the guild if he had registered in another city. Then she saw his name on the updated information list and hired a carriage to come. With that, without mincing words, Primula Mallow asks Kenichi to make her a woman that night. Kenichi stammers frantically as his neurons fry, but seeing that the girl won't back down, he invites her to the room where she's staying, bringing a smile to her face. Thus, they ascend to the room, and the young man compliments the beautiful setting. Fearing the man might flee, the woman begins to undress quickly, but to be honest, she preferred to take a shower first. Enthralled by the sight, Kenichi comments that she is beautiful just the way she is and, embracing her, confesses he's glad she is there. Hours later, the couple returns home, but Anemone seems jealous over the arrival of Primula. Similarly, Mallow's daughter complains that Kenichi left her behind but brought that little brat along. The man tries to explain that it's a long story and that, for example, Miley found him by scent. Suddenly, the Catwoman hugs the human tightly and shares how she always values the haste she has, but Primula pushes the beast woman away, wanting to know how Anemone ended up there. Kenichi argues that she's just a child and couldn't just be abandoned, so Primula decides to forgive her friend for today, leaving Anemone annoyed. The little girl asks if this lady is going to live with them because the house is going to be quite cramped, then the two exchange unfriendly looks. The homeowner announces that Primula will indeed live with them. Anemone asks her stepfather not to bring any more women home, and thinking he hesitated in his response, Primula asks if there is someone else in his life. To make matters worse, the woman notices that even a lynx has been adopted by the guy, but she was left behind, making her feel even more sidelined. At night, Kenichi starts to feel the challenges of having enlarged the family. At bath time, Miley and Anemone raise their hands to volunteer to join the man, and Primula follows suit. In the end, to solve the problem, he buys another tub for the girls to stay in. But as Anemone insists on bathing with her father, he finally gives in, but makes it clear that it's time for the girl to start bathing alone, although she makes it clear she's not at all keen. Seeing Primula outside of the chaos, Kenichi invites her to join everyone, and she admits she's embarrassed. But when the man asks if she prefer to go in alone afterwards, the woman wastes no time and jumps into the bathtub next to Miley. After the bath, the three women of the house dry off with the steam generator, and the man watches the scene while having a drink. The next day, Kenichi tries out the grimoire he finally holds in his hands. As he recites the spell described in the book, he extends his right hand and shouts, "Fireball," but absolutely nothing happens. Frustrated, he remembers the mage lady said that reading it is pointless if the person has no magical powers. Since the book was expensive, he asks Primula if it's hard to sell grimoires, and she replies that it's not because some people collect them, even though they can't use magic. In the midst of this conversation, Anemone had grabbed the book and begins to recite the spell. And with that, a mana aura surrounds the child's body and leaves her father dumbfounded. Finally, the girl launches a fireball that takes over the house. Seeing the tragedy that could unfold, Kenichi quickly buys 3 fire extinguishers and teaches the women how to use them on the spot. They follow the steps, pulling the pin to extinguish the fire, while Anemone watches from just behind. A few minutes later, the fire is finally contained and the child asks for forgiveness with her head bowed. Instead of a scolding, her foster father praises her ability to use magic as incredible. However, out of the blue, the girl faints and collapses to the ground. After some time, she wakes up in bed and eats some healthy items Kenichi bought, like canned peaches, which help her recover faster. By the way, Anemone loved the peaches. Miley remarks that this stuff is very similar to Rinka, while Primula notes that only nobles have access to such food since it requires a lot of sugar and that resource is monopolized by them. Days after Anemone's recovery, Kenichi goes to fetch Mary, who had recovered from chicory fever. The family has a barbecue with a mountain of meat they had from the tusked bear, and the smell of grilled meat sets high expectations before the food is even served. The moment Kenichi bites into the first piece of meat, he reflects that eating an animal you hunted yourself is the essence of a tranquil life. Mary comments that the meat is too tough and is scolded by her mother, but Kenichi agrees with the child. Primula does not hide that the food smells very strong. Since the meat is tough, Kenichi tenderizes it thoroughly and makes some of his secret sauce using soy sauce, cayenne pepper, and dried tangerine peels. Now, after the sauce is ready, everyone enjoys the meat much more because what Kenichi made was none other than his special curry recipe, leaving everyone stunned by the quality of the flavor. Next, Mary and Anemone celebrate finishing the picture book they were making together. Upon seeing it, all Primula can think of is that this product could make good money if marketed. Suddenly, the girl's mind is flooded with visions of doing business in Astrantia. Kenichi reflects alone that this woman is indeed a born merchant and wonders if perhaps it was he who sparked this flame in her soul. By the way, he asks what else she would sell besides the book, and she mentions that she could sell the bear meat pot au feu and cooked rinka. Anamon's mother emphasizes that even in Ostrantia, you won't find a soup as delicious as this, and Kenichi thinks it was because of his sauce addition, as he added enough sugar to justify that it's the sweetness of the rinka. By the way, Anamon's mother asks if Primula really will serve this food in his stall. Could she repay them for everything they've done for her, since she feels guilty for not being able to thank Kenichi enough? Referring to Primula as Kenichi's wife, she remembers it would be the merchant's first time in Ostrantia, and having experience as a waitress could help her with that. Kenichi thinks that's asking too much, while Primula only cares about the fact that she was called the wife of the man of her dreams. Mary offers help too, claiming she's almost at the age to start causing trouble, so Anamon goes along and decides to help as well, not wanting to be far from her father. The next day, the man took Primula to do business in Ostrantia. Upon arriving, the first thing he does is buy a cart for the vendors to start their work and sell the food in the middle of the town. In no time, people line up to try the dish, as only nobles have access to this type of food, and now common peasants are indulging in this pot au feu marvel. However, things start to go wrong at one point. Two men complain that their soup had a fly in it, but Primula defends herself, arguing they take great care to prevent that from happening, but the customers don't accept the mere suggestion that they put the insect in the bowl themselves. Meanwhile, Kenichi pilots a drone to the plateau at the top of the cliff, which was completely untouched, and surely many medicinal herbs and vegetables could be found there. Behind him with binoculars, Anamon comments that there are many beautiful and shiny stones there, while the adult confesses he has never seen a pink mineral like the one there, and he can't help but feel that a resource like that must be worth a fortune. Now the big problem would be mining it. In the late afternoon, the protagonist returns to the city and meets his companions. Primula is moved to tears as she reports that they sold all the food and picture books. Hearing this, Kenichi thinks to himself that this girl has a knack for this kind of thing that he can barely imagine. Beside his friends, there is a beast woman, so he asks who she is, and Primula explains that it's a complicated story. Earlier, when the trouble with the customers and the fly in the soup occurred, this beast woman appeared and told them that the men put the insect in the food and commands them to empty their pockets if they want to prove her wrong. Instead, the two scoundrels run off, and the problem is neatly resolved by the beast woman. For this reason, Primula hires her as a bodyguard, and the beast seems grateful, as she earns a silver coin just to ward off some troublemakers now and then, and it really is hard to find such an easy job. By the way, she introduces herself as Naimena, and Kenichi asks her to take good care of his friends. When they arrive home at night, Miley asks who this new woman entering their territory is. Kenichi explains that Primula invited the new bodyguard to dinner, so the cat is relieved to have thought the man had found another woman again. Velvet approaches the owner sadly and caresses him, causing the man to return the gesture of affection. Noticing the presence of a large lynx, Naimena bows before the sacred animal. At dinner time, the beast woman falls in love with the bear meat stew but admits it would be perfect with some wine. Luckily, the host had summoned home and serves his guest, who joyfully downs a glass, having never tasted such delicious wine. Kenichi reflects that it was the cheapest one from the online store, but no matter. Soon, as Naimena thinks she's in paradise, Kenichi offers her a bath, and Anamon quickly volunteers to heat the water. The task is performed in an unconventional way by the child, using a fireball spell that instantly heats the bathwater. Naimena wastes no time and dashes to the water, while the man of the house asks if there's any problem with casting those spells in succession. Primula explains that the more you use magic, the more you enhance your skill, which surprises him. Eventually, the girls enjoy the bath, while Naimena scares the others by pretending to be a noble enjoying a luxurious bath. After the bath, all the women dry off, and the guest has the nerve to lay down in a bed and declare she's going to live there. Miley loses her patience and makes it clear there's no room for one more, leading to a heated argument. However, they soon turn their attention to Kenichi, who's teaching Anamon to read, write, and do arithmetic. He believes that options for women are limited, so it would be good to broaden her job possibilities. Naimena agrees, adding that women without proper education often end up selling their bodies, until Kenichi suggests bringing in Mary to learn something about business from Primula. Anamon confesses she'd rather learn more about magic to go on adventures with her dad and slay a dragon, but Kenichi dampens her spirits by revealing he just wants a peaceful life. The next day after Naimena spends the night, Primula reopens her stall in Ostrantia and continues to do well, now under the protection of the beast woman guarding the business. As for Mary, she and her mother receive a letter from Krukun at home, while Kenichi enlists the help of Miele and Anamon to finish building a scaffold to climb the cliff. By late afternoon, Primula arrives at the scaffold construction and asks Kenichi something she's always wanted to know. he has many things like these materials in his item box. He confirms he does, but he can't show everything inside even to a friend because everyone has secrets, just as Primula hides things within herself that Kenichi has no idea about. With that said, the man questions if the woman has lost trust in him and kisses her without another word. After the kiss, he makes it clear this is the girl's chance to return to Dahlia if she prefers, but she insists she doesn't want to leave. Looking annoyed, Nyamena asks the couple not to get too excited in front of her or she might be tempted. Then Kenichi asks if the beast woman doesn't have anyone, even being so beautiful. With an even grimmer expression, she responds that she wants nothing to do with useless men. Amidst this, Miley and Anemone shout from the house that they're hungry. The following morning, Kenichi is cutting the grass in the yard with his modern tool from planet Earth, and Primula takes a day off because the man said he was going up the cliff. He asks the two beast women to fetch Mary and her mother, Cineria, which puts Anemone in a great mood. The two kids play near the beautiful lake and can see the village from afar. Once at the top of the cliff, each person seems in search of something different. Nyamena shows her friends a handful of spreading mushrooms, which are delicious. Miley spots a different bird flying in the sky and promises to bring her bow next time. Anemone and Mary find some red and blue snapdragons. Meanwhile, Kenichi is there for the pink ore he spotted the other day, and with the help of an electric hammer, he manages to extract a stone from this resource to store in the item box and evaluate. This ore is called rhodonite, and a stone this size is worth about 200,000 yen, meaning just this stone alone pays back the value of the hammer he invested in. Therefore, as he collects more and more stones from that mineral, the merchant celebrates, anticipating the money filling his pocket. At the end of the day, he puts the bear meat in milk to marinate and lose its smell, in addition to preparing Swiss chard with the spreading mushroom Nyamena found. According to him, the name of this recipe is gyoza. After the preparation period, it's time to serve the meal at the table, and all the residents gather to share the dish. There isn't a soul at that table who isn't enchanted by the unique flavor of that recipe, as well as by the mayonnaise. By the way, Nyamena comments that it was a mage from the Empire who created this mayonnaise with magic. Kenichi knows well that it's the same guy who introduced to this world the concept of double-entry bookkeeping, the jar pump, and apparently this mayonnaise too. By the way, Primula asks if the guy used magic to create this sauce, and he shares that he uses some simple things like egg, vinegar, and oil. Realizing this would sell like water in the desert, Primula rushes to write down the recipe, but the cook would love to eat in peace before anything else. As he tastes another piece of the food, he evaluates that it really needs Swiss chard and a gyoza, that the bear meat doesn't detract from the flavor, and that the mushroom gives a nice twist to the taste. Soon he notes that it would be great in a soup, if using a thicker dough, and Primula confesses she would love to sell this recipe at her stall. The man remembers that this would be a lot of work, but the merchant is willing to hire people to get the job done because one of the secrets of the Mallow Company to make a profit is go after people to help, but don't forget to give a proper payment. At night, Kenichi gathers the girls to showcase his own fireball trick. With that, he pours a drink onto the lit grill, causing a burst of flames to rise. A few minutes later, the bear steaks he was grilling for the barbecue were ready. When Nyamena tries this delicacy, she falls obsessively in love with the meat and asks about the aroma emanating from it. The grill master explains that it's the scent of the brandy he used to marinate the meat and mask its strong smell. Hearing this, the Catwoman hugs her boss and confesses that she has a request to make, while Miley and Primulo watch the scene with visible envy. In the next scene, he's serving brandy to the beast, who apparently enjoys a good drink. He advises her to go easy since it's a strong beverage, but once she smells the alcohol, she can't resist and downs the entire glass. Overjoyed by the free drink, Nyamena quickly becomes boisterous and hugs the homeowner again, declaring she will never return to the city. That is, until Miley pulls her hair to keep her away from their master. Yet Nyamena shamelessly asks to live there with meals included. Miley screams that it won't happen, but Kenichi and Primula like the idea, considering the bodyguard to be quite honest. Primula, in particular, is relieved that the beast woman is only interested in food and drink rather than men. Later, when being shown to her room, Nyamena asks about the rent, but Kenichi clarifies that he won't charge her anything. This scares the beast, who thinks the human wants to tame her by offering free lodging, but he explains that he just needs the bodyguard to help Primula with her work. With that, he bids her goodnight and turns to leave, but Nyamena grabs him from behind and asks if he really intends to enter a woman's room and leave without doing anything. At that moment, Miley bursts through the door, furious, and the two engage in a brief competition for the attention of the human male. A month later, Primula's stall has expanded to the point of hiring new staff and has been renamed Corolla Restaurant. One of the new employees introduces herself as Iris, full of charm, making Primula jealous by clearly stating she is the man's wife. According to what Kenichi has heard, Primula taught Iris to cook and manage the business to open other branches of the restaurant. At night, the businesswoman reveals that having branches will allow her to have more time to chase after her husband if necessary. Over the days, Kenichi extracted 15 million yen in rhodonite. Anemone began to collect medicinal herbs from the forest at the cliff's top, while Mayuri and Nyamena hunted animals there. Corolla Restaurant rented a warehouse to prepare products and started making about 200,000 yen per day, aiming to reach 70 million per year. With this money, she opened 2 more branches and raised the profit expectation to 200 million for the year. Thanks to the sauce that Kenichi buys from Shangri-La, the food at Corolla stands out from the rest, giving them a significant advantage. The day after, in a castle, a girl named Lilith is informed by her mother that bandits near Dahlia have been defeated by a mage who summons iron beasts. It appears this mage lives near Astrantia, a clear sign that their path is being guided by the spirits.
The next day, Primula visits the mansion of Viscount Eupatorium, the Lord of Astrantia, and is received by his official wife, Canum el Eupatorium. Recognizing the girl as the daughter of Dahlia's greatest merchant and inventor of Dressina, as well as the owner of Corolla, a restaurant with 2 branches in Astrantia, Canum welcomes her warmly. Meanwhile, the Lady Sorcerer introduces Kenichi to a spell called Explosion. Remembering it as the same one cast by the gentleman who had accompanied them on the mission against Shaga and his henchmen, he purchases the grimoire without a second thought. Seeing that Anemone is interested in a book since her arrival, the shopkeeper gifts it to the child, a book on domestic magic that requires no registration. That evening, Primula shares that the Viscount's wife desires a brooch because during her visit to Dahlia, another noble boasted about the brooches sold by the Mallow Company, which drove the rich lady crazy. Despite Kenichi's lack of patience for such trivial disputes among the ladies, he accesses his online store and selects a brooch to purchase. Primula is delighted with the quality of the design, especially since the woman engraved on the stone closely resembles Viscountess Eupatorium. Kenichi then suggests telling the noblewoman it was made especially for her, as it could bring in a significant amount of money, and Primula agrees with a characteristic facial expression. Kenichi notices she has been using this expression quite frequently lately, but can't figure out why. Later, Mayuri broaches the topic of a dungeon with Kenichi, and although he feels eager to embark on such an adventure, he pretends to be uninterested because the Catwoman hadn't mentioned it at dinner. In fact, Mayuri avoided discussing it with anyone to prevent Nyamena from hearing and wanting to join. Kenichi asks the younger feline to make an effort to get along with the other, but she refuses. At the same time, Anemone volunteers to join the expedition. Her father warns it's not a walk in the park, while Mayuri tries to frighten the girl by mentioning the many monsters lurking there, but the little one insists on helping the man in their adventures to defeat a dragon, as she had previously declared. Thus, the group sets off with Velvet towards their first dungeon adventure. They traverse the forest until they reach a fissure in a giant rock, opening up to the cave they sought. Inside, Anemone looks around in wonder at how cool and interesting it all is, just as Mayuri observes every corner of the labyrinth like another child, while Kenichi takes the opportunity to photograph everything he sees. Further ahead, they find a shimmering crystal on the wall, so the man wastes no time and begins mining the resource, eyeing the money it could bring him. However, suddenly a cave spider emerges from the depths of the dungeon and threatens the team. Kenichi shoots a crossbow dart at the creature, but the projectile doesn't even penetrate its skin. Mayuri is smarter and hits the spider's eye with her bow, making the merchant realize that this is its weak point. With that in mind, he instructs Anemone to aim at the enemy's eyes with her magic, but the little girl is paralyzed with fear in the face of terror. Moreover, the spider spits its web on the child, forcing Mayuri to save her at the last moment. Seeing that the situation is getting dire, Kenichi throws several bombs at the giant arachnid and orders his allies to retreat. Then he summons his motorcycle from the inventory and quickly flees. Outside the dungeon, Mayuri notes that cave spiders only come out to hunt at night, meaning they won't be pursued by it. Kenichi hugs his daughter, who is terrified, and comments that it's indeed too early for such adventures. Anemone apologizes, but the man is understanding given it's the girl's first expedition. At night, Nyamena is furious because Mayuri didn't mention the earlier adventure, so she confronts the feline, who doesn't back down and sparks fly from their exchange of angry glances. Meanwhile, Kenichi is worried about the machine he left behind in the cave, especially since he didn't extract the ore he wanted. Nyamena makes it clear she wants to go, but Kenichi can't leave Primula unprotected at home. About this, the merchant herself says she's fine, even wanting a break, so it would be a good idea to take a few days off. Kenichi asks if anything is bothering her, but she assures him there's nothing. Naima interjects to confirm she's in if the next day's outing to hunt the spider goes ahead, which would be the perfect trip to dispel her irritation. After bathing, Kenichi informs Anemone that the grimoire she received has been successfully registered, and the girl wastes no time in picking up the book and starting to chant the spells. Kenichi stops her immediately, fearing she might collapse everything with some magic, so he suggests she try only when she's better prepared. Meanwhile, Naima is excited to teach the child how to be a true adventurer. The next day, the young sorceress practices her fireball, and Kenichi buys insecticides for each of his companions to prepare for the cave spider. Soon, they return to the entrance of the dungeon, and the man is worried his foster daughter is still scared. However, despite clearly not being 100%, the girl shows bravery and assures him she's fine. Naima takes the opportunity to praise her friend and emphasize that women must always be strong, and speaking of the Catwoman, Kenichi is curious to learn what she taught Anemone, so he announces the start of the new expedition to the cave. Sometime later, the group reaches the same point where they were first attacked, where the crystal they found next to Kenichi's machine was located. Without delay, he restarts the machine to get back to work, although the girls can't stand the unbearable noise it makes. Amid this, Velvet once again hears something approaching their location, and indeed, it's the same cave spider making an appearance. Immediately, the human grabs the insecticides he purchased and tells everyone to arm themselves with them. When thrown towards the arachnid, the substance manages to keep it at bay, giving Anemone the chance to fire her fireball, which hits the enemy squarely and creates a huge blaze in the room that makes the conjurer smile with pride and joy. Amidst the massive damage, the spider exhibits severe burns on its body and retreats, prompting everyone to celebrate with the child for a job well done. Amidst the celebration, Kenichi reflects that Anemone must still be scared inside. Whether true or not, Naima calls the little girl to chase after the spider, and she is ready in an instant. They then delve deeper into the dungeon in search of the giant creature, until they come upon an opening leading to a large cavern. Kenichi buys an LED spotlight to illuminate everything around them, and this light is crucial for them to quickly find the fleeing spider. Quickly, the team resumes spraying insecticide, while Anemone is tasked with the final blow. However, Velvet senses something is wrong. Seeing the direction the lynx was growling at, Miley notices one of the rocks moving, but it turns out to be not a rock, but a female cave spider, even larger than the male they were facing. Knowing they would fare badly in a direct confrontation, the group realizes that only the male can cross the narrower parts of the cave to bring food to the female, and if he dies, she would surely die as well. With this in mind, they all flee, but the spider is so fast it manages to block their exit. Velvet charges at the enemy and slashes her eye with a claw, then the allies take the opportunity to spray her with insecticide. Kenichi asks if Anemone is ready to cast a spell, and the little girl strains to hurl a fireball at the female spider. However, despite the visible burns, it doesn't seem enough to take down the giant. Even so, she does not attack the invading group, leaving Kenichi puzzled. Naima believes the spider intends to kill everyone along with her by blocking the passage, which they certainly cannot allow. In that case, Kenichi turns around and stores the male spider in his inventory, while the two beasts of the group continue spraying the female with insecticide. Still, even after much poison, the opponent insists on surviving, so Kenichi decides that the only way to get rid of this darned creature is through brute force. For this, he buys a hydraulic excavator with 157 horsepower and 6,690 displacement. Before starting the action, he tells everyone to hide in a safe place, but Anemone insists on going with her father, and he eventually agrees. Thus, with the girl in his arms, the man approaches and shouts the name of his invented skill, Bucket Swing, forged by the long sleeves of death and swung by the goddess of war. With that, the strike is executed, but the spider grabs the tractor's bucket. Kenichi doesn't let up and slams on the brake with all his might to make the critter let go forcibly. Then he continues the offensive with the mortal strike, Bucket Attack. According to him, this is the giant's hammer falling from the skies right towards the spider's head. However, despite having fared well so far, it wasn't enough for the driver to defeat his rival, who climbs the excavator's arm. Moreover, the vehicle simply won't start again, making the situation even more critical. However, Inamona begins a conjuration and recites the correct words until she manifests the explosion, a spell that sends the spider flying away in a thunderous impact. To improve the situation, the excavator starts working again. Then the driver accelerates with all his might towards the giant, who by this time is practically surrendered after being hurled against the wall. Finally, he uses his crushing bucket skill, smashing the cave spider and ending the intense combat. After resolving the problem, Kenichi stores the body of the defeated creature and returns to extracting his beloved crystals. On top of it all, he complains about spending too much money again, but upon seeing the value of a raw crystal, he realizes that the money invested in his excavator has just been comfortably recovered. Hours later, the expedition ends and the group exits the dungeon. Kenichi asks when Inamona learned to use explosion, and she says it was the first time she tried. With that, Naimna gives the child an OK sign, which she returns. At the end of the afternoon, the homeowner returns to his sweet home and throws the female spider in the middle of the yard to Primula's despair. As if that wasn't enough, he displays a spider egg collected among the spoils. The man would love to eat the egg, but literally all the women find it extremely disgusting. Ignoring all their drama, the merchant reverts to his cook persona and plans to make a steamed egg custard for today. Incidentally, in Hokkaido, his hometown, they use sugar in this recipe, so it's a dessert. Sometime later, the food is ready, and although the girls were initially resistant due to the origin of the main ingredient, they soon give in to curiosity and try Kanisha's eccentric dish, delighting in the tenderness and flavor of the meat and cheese. Speaking of which, the cook asks if there is cheese in the realm of Kaden, and Primula responds that yes, although it is made only in some regions and quite expensive. With that, the man recalls that cheese production is quite easy, which immediately piques Primula's interest. With no escape, he explains that all you need is milk and apple cider vinegar, which since it's not available in this world, he uses Rinka vinegar instead. With it, they can make cottage cheese. After he prepares some of this cheese for the girls, they attack the dish and find the flavor sensational. Their admiration for the cook is such that Naimna starts to believe that Kenichi might be some kind of god, something Inamona knew from the beginning, as she prayed to God every day and asked him to let her eat tasty food every day. Primula interrupts the conversation to express her desire to teach Viscountess Eupatorium how to prepare this cheese. Kenichi makes it clear that he has no interest in getting involved with any nobles, but the woman insists on this for a good reason. After all, the Corolla restaurant has been suffering a series of attacks and threats from a man named Thogalum, a corrupt merchant. Despite the delicate situation, while suffering the harassment, Primula asked Naimna to keep this information secret and not to tell Kenichi yet. Returning to the present moment, the merchant saw no choice but to spill the beans, so Kenichi learns that she wants to use the power of the nobility to get rid of this criminal. Kenichi replies that there's no need to involve the nobles, as he can handle it with a single crossbow shot, and soon all the allies are ready to help. However, Primula asks her companions not to get involved in this mess right now, considering that the merchants have their own way of fighting. In the end, the group agrees to wait and see how the story unfolds, while Primula promises not to reveal how she learned to make cheese. Sometime later, Thogalum receives a message from the Viscountess, threatening to punish anyone who bothers the Corolla restaurants. Enraged, the criminal throws the letter to the ground, but admits it was a smart move by Mallow's daughter. Regardless, he believes it's only a matter of time before he gets what he wants, no matter how much she knows. As for the much-talked-about daughter of Mallow, she finally manages to reopen her restaurant with peace and can work calmly and without fear, until one day something happens. Observing the lake with his binoculars, Kenichi spots Viscountess Kenum Eupatorium approaching by canoe from the shore of his residence. When the noblewoman arrives and is welcomed by the residents, she immediately shares rumors that have been spreading around the region about a certain mage who suddenly appeared in Dahlia, defeated Shaga using summoned iron beasts, and disappeared without anyone noticing. Kenichi pretends he has no idea what the woman is talking about, but having already investigated it, Kenum knows more than she seems about the case. Thus, she lowers her head and closes her eyes, leaving Kenichi with an ominous feeling. The next day, Kenichi was leaving town with his entire family packed into a car. Nyamna, fearful, questioned whether it was really safe to simply enter the belly of that beast. As he drove, Kanishi reflected on how the kingdom of Kadin, by the king's order, was constructing a massive irrigation canal. The plan was to build a large canal, ignoring the rivalry among the lords, to expand the agricultural land. Meanwhile, in a castle, several men were gathered around Viscount Eupatorium, all laughing at him because he was the only noble among them without a deadline to build a canal, while the rest of the lords were already making progress. Among those who laughed at Eupatorium, Viscount Thunbergia seemed to take the most pleasure in his rival's humiliation. Pressured for a clearer response, the charged noble promised on behalf of his family that he would finish the canal on time. If Viscount Eupatorium failed to complete the project soon, the budget from the kingdom would decrease, risking the confiscation of his lands. For this reason, his wife sought Kanishi's help. She informed him that they needed to build 5 more miles in 1 month, and if Kanishi could assist, Kanum was willing to offer anything as a reward, including her own body. Seeing that Kanishi was reluctant to discuss on those terms, Kanum quickly retracted and mentioned the high protection, knowing he was reputed as a mage and would likely be interested in grimoires. Confused due to his lack of experience and knowledge in that area, Nyamna explained that high protection was an advanced defensive magic that could even stop a dragon's breath. Listening intently, the supposed wizard thought it would be beneficial if Anemone could use that technique, so he accepted the request. Thus, in addition to the grimoire, he also received some unused furniture from the Viscount's mansion to serve as financing. Speaking of which, Kanishi evaluated the furniture at the Shangri-La store, and selling these items brought in 120 million yen. Back to the present moment inside the car, Kanum brought up the topic of offering her body to Kanishi again, but he sharply turned the steering wheel and informed her that he already had a wife. Anemone quickly interjected that she too belonged to Kanishi, which upset Kanum, forcing the man to explain that it was just childish talk. Not satisfied, the human emphasized that he might accept beast women, but she could not be included. In response, Kanishi Hamada affirmed that would never happen. Some time later, they arrived at the construction site, and Kanishi was unpleasantly surprised. The remaining 5 miles of the canal construction were all through a forest, meaning they would have to clear a path through all the trees to complete the job. If it were just manual labor, such a construction would surely take at least a year to complete. Amidst this, 3 beast men friends of Miley, Nyakero, Nyamilo, and Nyanji, approached Kanishi asking what they were doing at the site since they had already earned a hefty sum on a mission to defeat Shaga and his gang, only to sorrowfully admit they had spent all the money. At that moment, Nyamna came up hugging the human from behind, and the 3 beast men fell in love with that beauty. Miley was filled with jealousy because they had never seen her like this, but they only had eyes for the taller beast and paid no mind to their longtime friend. Next, the commercial representatives involved in this construction introduced themselves to Kanishi and Kanum. Kanum introduced her partner as a mage, but he insisted on correcting that he was just a merchant. Eventually, one of the representatives handed a spreadsheet to the Viscountess and, reviewing the papers with her, Primula was outraged to see that they were charging 10 silver coins for a mere axe. According to her, there was clearly something wrong with these prices, as all the items appeared overpriced and should be much cheaper. The representative urged calm and argued that the transportation costs to the site had to be considered. Besides, they were the only ones who could procure so many axes at once. That said, Primula asked Kanishi if he was capable of obtaining the same number of tools, and he confirmed that he could, then purchased an axe at Shangri-La for about 1 silver coin. Overwhelmed, Kanum asked if he could really get all that equipment for that price, and Kanishi assured her he would make this friendly discount. Even more moved, the Viscount's wife asked if the two were really comrades. On the other hand, the commercial representative was furious and made it clear that he was there on behalf of the Thogalum Mercantile Company, and hoped that no one would forget that. Kanishi asked Primula if this was the man he was thinking of, and the woman confirmed it, worried. From what he learned, Thogalum was a merchant who had also delved into regional administration, and, it seemed, occasionally handled the king's dirty work. Regardless, the focus needed to be on this challenging construction project, and that's what Hamada did. With this in mind, he brought in his backhoe, which consumed 400 liters of fuel per day. If he had to produce biodiesel, the machine owner wouldn't be able to finish the construction within the deadline, so he ended up purchasing kerosene at Shangri-La to power the vehicle. Piloting the backhoe, Kanishi impressed the builders with all that power they had never imagined possible. Mostly composed of the beast people, the group of builders used their breaks to offer tributes to the Great Lynx, as they called Velvet, considering that, in their culture, this animal was akin to a messenger from God. After the shift, Kanum complained that her carriage hadn't arrived yet, so Kanishi invited her to dinner at his house. Using magic, he and Anemone prepared a batch of carriage chicken, leaving the Viscountess salivating at the crunchy texture of the food, along with the quality wine he was able to serve at the meal. Pleased with the compliments, Kanishi invited the 3 beast men to join them, and they thanked him for the invitation. But looking around, all the workers were also hungry. According to what Kanishi had heard from the workers, even though there was a restaurant that turned into a tavern at night in the area, it was too expensive for them to eat there every day. Therefore, Primula graciously offered to serve food to everyone, but at a fair price. Facing this business opportunity, the merchant's keen sense led her to yet another profitable night. Food was prepared late into the night, turning the occasion into a festive moment for the construction workers. At one point, Kanishi went to check on Kanum to see if she was all right, and she expressed gratitude for witnessing such a joyful scene where everyone ate and danced with enthusiasm. Later, Kanishi showed the Viscountess where she would bathe that day, and she could hardly believe she had the privilege of using such refined bathtubs, especially considering that the homeowner had brought these new acquisitions to his residence. However, to his surprise, the guest practically forced him to bathe with her, and when she undressed, she tried to grab him. Despite this, he continued to resist her advances because he had a family. After all, not having blood ties with any of those people didn't mean he couldn't consider them as such, since couples often start as complete strangers to each other. Speaking of family, Kanum confessed she had never had such a fun meal in her life, as all her parents ever thought about was whom their daughter would marry one day, nothing more. Ignoring the subject, Kanishi reached his limit and bid farewell to the guest to leave. And although Kanum was annoyed by the man's lack of empathy for her story, he had to leave to avoid trouble with Primula. The next day, to his surprise, the Viscountess was working alongside his wife to ensure lunch for the workers. Despite what happened the previous day, Kanishi couldn't take his eyes off Kanum. She asked if she looked strange without makeup, and he confessed that he found her so beautiful and attractive that he almost fell in love. Kanum replied that she would accept him whenever he wanted, but the other girls in the house did not seem very happy with this conversation. From there, he backed off and said that infidelity wasn't a very good deal, so it would be best to stop there. In turn, Kanum stated that he still had a month to change his mind. In the midst of this mess, the owner of the tavern where the workers usually dined arrived at the construction site, outraged that her establishment had been empty the previous night. Primula responded that one of Mallow Company's mottos was always to profit from honest services, and the sales representative was shocked to hear the name Mallow come from the young woman's mouth. In any case, Primula emphasized that they should practice fair pricing since they were so nervous about losing customers. From that day on, the tavern owner relented and lowered the price of the meals, so Kanishi now returned to focus more on finishing the construction within the established deadline. Among many other benefits, the mage could store the huge tree trunks that were cut along the way in his inventory, saving the workers a tiresome job. As the days passed, the Viscountess's servants finally arrived, but were surprised by her insistence on taking care of the workers' meals by herself. At night, the homeowner worried about the water running out of his bathtub, and, pensive, he left the bathhouse to think outside whether it would be a good idea to buy more from the online store. Although humans always seemed dirtier, the beast men managed to stay clean. According to them, there was a nearby spring that could be easily reached by their race, but it was difficult for humans to get there on foot. Because of this, Kanishi asked the trio of beast men to bring water from the spring in exchange for more drink. Thus, they struck a win-win agreement, and happiness overtook the beast people when they returned from their task and could enjoy the rest of the night getting drunk. Kanishi said goodbye to retire for the night, as he would have to wake up early. However, Kanum, who had also gotten drunk, grabbed him and forced him to take another bath with her. But as soon as she reached the bathtub, she simply passed out. The next day, he approached the Viscountess to remind her that she had signed a document the previous day committing to follow his instructions from now on. Since she was drunk, the woman was afraid she had signed a paper that obliged her to hide her real identity and wander the streets night after night, engaging with vulgar and filthy men in exchange for money. But Kenishi thought this talk seemed more like some bizarre fetish. Moreover, he had easier ways to make money. In fact, the document was to ensure Kanam no longer forced him to do anything. From that day on, work began to progress steadily. Primula was doing well with the food and also learned how to use an abacus to help keep the construction's accounts. Thus, everyone successfully completed the Astrantia Canal within the deadline, and a celebration was held in front of the royal family who came from the capital. Even though he had no desire to participate, Kenishi was pressured to attend the party and ended up showing up. He was introduced to the audience once again as a mage, and Kanam referred to him as the man responsible for the largest contribution to the canal's completion through his unique magic. To top it off, Kenishi had to give a brief demonstration of his abilities, so he summoned the backhoe and left everyone astonished by juggling with the vehicle's claw using a log. Nervous because the Eupatorium had managed to finish the canal on time, Viscount Thunbergia confessed to Kanam that he thought she and her husband would abandon their lands and flee at night for not having finished the work within the deadline. Then the woman responded that this joke was only funnier than the sick look on that crazy guy's face. Kenishi watched the exchange of barbs and realized that man seemed to be hoping for the construction's failure. Furthermore, Primula mentioned to her husband that there was an old man in Thunbergia's carriage. He was the former noble exiled from Dahlia who had lost his title and lands. It was he who had paid Shaga to kidnap her. The next day, Viscount Graham Dupatorium personally thanks Kenishi for his services. Being honest, he admits that he usually leaves the governance to others, but his wife had informed him that the project would never have been completed without Kenishi Hamada's support. Ultimately, this was Graham's chance to redeem himself and restore the land he inherited from his father. By the way, he shows a book sold at the Primula store and asks how they managed to make it since neither the text nor the images were drawn with a pen, and it's not a woodcut either. Kenishi explained the process to the Viscount and was surprised to find out that they both come from creative fields. Tearfully, after learning how it's done, Graham finally realizes his dream of creating a book for people to read. Besides, back at the meeting, Viscount Eupatorium manages to convince Primula to take care of the finances of his land, but she admits she would need her father's support in this endeavor. Graham seems both scared and thrilled that the owner of the famous Mallow Company might get involved, as this is more than he could have hoped for. However, if the Mallow Company starts to meddle with Astrantia, Graham fears how Thogalum might react. Kenishi asks if the Viscount couldn't just expel that man from his lands, but, as embarrassing as it is to admit, Graham doesn't have enough budget even to maintain knights. That said, Kanam has another favor to ask of Kenishi. Either way, he and his family return to where they came from, on the shores of the lake surrounding Santanka village. There, they reinstated their wooden house after receiving the high protection grimoire promised by the Viscountess. Later, at bath time, Anemone was already stepping into the tub with Kenishi as usual. But this time, Primula challenges the little girl to a game of odds or evens to see who would have that privilege. The citizen's wife ends up winning and joins her husband, although Anemone whispers in her ear that she's too close to her stepfather. For her part, Primula won at odds or evens and declares that she can do whatever she wants. Earlier today, Lilith informed a maid that she was going to visit her mother, Malin. Upon arriving at the Queen's office, she mentioned that something interesting had happened, and the woman confirmed that Viscount Eupatorium's staff had miraculously finished the canal on time, contrary to what Thunbergia had predicted. Thunbergia, who is low-ranking within the anti-royalty faction, had sent a letter claiming that Eupatorium would fail to deliver the canal on schedule. He not only questioned his rival's ability to govern, but also presented himself as a prime candidate for the Viscount's position. However, a mage who summoned never-before-seen iron beasts appeared and completed the construction in record time. Lilith confessed her desire to meet this widely talked-about mage, considering him the type of man who deserved the power of a holy knight. Switching back to the protagonist's bath time, Naima speculated that Anemone's ability to use magic must have come from someone like her mother, a notion that made a lot of sense to Kenishi. He mentioned that the girl had never spoken about her biological mother, and she admitted knowing little more than that it was her mother who had named her. Kenishi suggested that perhaps the woman who raised Ain had adopted her from a woman who died on the streets. He offered to look for the little girl's family, but she instantly refused without a second thought. Seeing the child walk away, Naimna explained that a woman needs nothing more when she is with the man she loves, prompting Kanishi to gently push away the Catwoman, highlighting their age difference. The next day, Anemone received her registered grimoire from Dahlia's witch. Kanishi took the opportunity to ask the lady if she knew of any mage who had lived in the area but died on the streets about 10 years ago. The shop owner immediately realized that he was looking for the little girl's mother. Regarding the matter, she wasn't sure if the mage had died on the streets, but she remembered someone with the same colored hair, known as Armeria the Silver, who had disappeared around that time. Moreover, Armeria was the previous owner of the grimoire Anemone was now holding. The witch questioned whether the girl truly wished to find her mother, asserting that what truly matters for a woman is the man she is with. Despite Kanishi arguing about being old enough to be the girl's father, the shopkeeper insisted that age doesn't matter. Later, on their way home, Ain decided to open the grimoire and began reciting a spell called High Protection, a shield that soon broke for some reason. Kanishi rushed towards his adopted daughter and asked what happened. She told him her stomach was hurting. The man became desperate, as emergency services 192 do not work in their world, while Miley tried to calm him down by suggesting it smelled like a human woman blossoming. Ain thought she might die because she had been too happy since meeting Kanishi, which relieved him when he noticed Primula and Naimna had arrived home earlier. Later, Primula gave the child a painkiller that seemed effective, as she appeared as good as new for now. The girl told her adoptive father that she could now have children, and he noted that this was cause for celebration. The girl casually mentioned it would be cool to have one with Kanishi, which made him spit out his tea before explaining that she needed to grow a bit more before thinking about such things at least 5 years, as it requires certain development to breastfeed. Primula scolded him for what she was witnessing, so he tried to explain that it's common for young daughters to say they will marry their father until they realize it's nonsensical as they grow up. Primula asked if that was a subtle hint towards her, revealing that she had said the same thing to Mr. Mallow when she was younger. That evening, they held a party to celebrate Anemone's blossoming, and Kanishi confessed that it seemed a bit old-fashioned to serve red rice on such an occasion, but he genuinely believed it was something to celebrate. Days later, a horse-drawn carriage suddenly appeared, traveling down the river towards their house. Out of it came Primula's father, making a visit. After learning that everything was going well with his daughter's restaurant, the merchant discussed with Kanishi a way to get rid of Thogalum. Before that, the homeowner had bought a table with chairs and an umbrella for them to sit and discuss another matter. But the Mallow's first reaction was to check the umbrella and consider how profitable it would be to sell it. As they all sat down, Kanishi directly asked for Primula's hand in marriage from her father. The man, having never had luck with women until this age, never thought he would say those words, especially in another world. At this, Mallow laughed, believing there was nothing to ask for since his daughter had forcefully entered the man's life. He even apologized for his daughter's stubborn and selfish ways, as it had been 10 years since he lost his wife and had to raise the girl alone, probably making Primula feel lonely. Nevertheless, Kanishi could now call Mallow his father-in-law. With this news, a celebration party lasted until dusk. Soon, the Mallows would prepare to establish a branch of the Mallow Company in Astrantia, send more workers to the center of this land, and help restore Eupatorium's finances as well. Financially speaking, they wanted to take control of this domain. The next morning, Anemone asked to go along with her father, but he told her to stay at Mary's house as it would be dangerous if the girl used her magic and caused a fire in the town. Amid this, a carriage from Crouton and Nyanya's had just arrived. When Norseball stepped out of the vehicle and realized that Kanishi and Primula had married, his world collapsed. In short, Primula had disappeared after this guy's marriage proposal, and he had learned from Crouton that the woman was there. So he came with Crouton when the man came to pick up the family. Considering it was the great Kanishi Hamada, the knight took the news well and accepted his fate graciously. Meanwhile, Thogalum has just learned from his employees about the recent movements of Mallow Company, one of his rivals. The protagonist arrives in the town alongside his friends. Excitedly, Kanum asks her husband if it would be possible to build a road to Kanisha's house once it's finished, but Hamada reminds her that it would be wise for the Viscountess to recover financially before considering such a project. Nonetheless, he informs the Baron and the others to wait there and heads to the entrance of Thogalum Mercantile Company. Pretending to want to negotiate, he approaches the company's vendors and pulls a giant spider from his inventory to throw amid the stalls. The merchant asks if he's looking for a fight, and he confirms without hesitation that's exactly what he came for. Thogelum rushes down to find out what the commotion is about, and Kenishi takes the opportunity to introduce himself as the much-talked-about mage of the region, promising to get even for everything this man did to his wife's restaurant. Thogelum orders his employees to teach the intruder a lesson, but everyone looks at the dead spider and decides it might not be a good idea to mess with this madman. The boss argues that surely this guy just stored the giant bug in his item box and didn't kill it at all, so Kenishi puts the arachnid back as he notices things are about to heat up. Similarly, Crouton, Nyanyas, Maile, and Naima step forward, as Norseball appears next, unsheathing his wolf fang sword. Last, although the defenders felt they had the upper hand with more people, suddenly Velvet appears and steps forward, startling the cat people who work for the mercantile company. Kenishi uses the faith of this race to emphasize that the sacred lynx would never join a villain and questions what will happen to the souls of the beasts if they die fighting a lynx, a messenger of their god. Immediately, the beasts run away from there to avoid committing such a grave sin, forcing Thogelum to rush inside the company to gather the rest of his gang. Once inside, facing a larger number of defenders, a dog man laughs as he holds his weapon and states it was a mistake to trust cats as usual. Thogelum asks if the guest will get rid of the unwanted visitors, and he confirms with his entire group that handling these stray cats won't be a problem. Velvet growls at the leader of the dogs, as it was he who shot the arrow at the lynx the day Kenishi met the animal. Remembering this well, the canine announces that fate has brought them together again and attacks without hesitation. Norseball steps forward and blocks the enemy's strike, while Naimna shows her exceptional skill with the bow by taking down a huge number of opponents one by one. Similarly, Maile vows to protect the sacred animal of their culture by finishing off every dog on the other side of the trench. Nyanyas joins the attack and kills 2 humanoid dogs, while Norseball stays busy with the main adversary of the company. In a swift move, the dog throws a knife quickly at the human warrior, but Velvet intervenes and prevents the ally from being injured. Finally, it's the turn of the supposed mage of Dahlia to step up by summoning the backhoe in the middle of the battlefield. Always naming each strike he delivers with this contraption, the man destroys Thogelum Company's fountain to throw the stones on the enemies, claiming that this is one of the 3 melee weapons that suck his soul to nirvana. After defeating all the opponents, only their boss is left behind. Kenishi chases the man with his excavator but decides to store the vehicle to summon the Umatsu, an even bigger backhoe that fits like a glove for bringing down Thogelum's entire shop. After the first strike on the construction, Thogelum goes mad and begs Hamada to stop. Although the pilot seems quite satisfied with bringing down the building, Mallow appears and asks for the destruction to stop there, as they could use the place for a branch of Mallow Company. Seeing the enemy's intention, Thogelum questions if he really thinks he'll get away after everything he's done. But Naima and Maile point their bows at the villain and show that he's not in a position to assert any authority at the moment. Kenishi recalls that Thogelum's henchmen became criminals trying to kill the Viscount as soon as they drew their weapons, until Graham Dupatorium himself appears to remind them that they've always had a complicated history. But he didn't expect an execution attempt by the rival. Thogelum accuses Graham of betrayal, to which Graham finds it strange to hear such a thing, as he never joined forces with him. Amidst this, Kenishi reflects that he thought Eupatorium was a dubious noble, but he is showing some courage now. Finally, the Viscount announces that if Thogelum leaves Astrantia immediately, he won't be formally charged with trying to kill him, but must leave his possessions behind, taking away only what he can carry on his body. Seeing that he has lost this battle, Thogelum kneels on the ground in a symbolic gesture of surrender. Later, after he gathers his belongings and family before entering the carriage, the owner of the ruined mercantile company tells Mallow that the brooches he sold to the nobles of Dahlia, or even the Dressina, were all because of this new mage he partnered with, and finally questions why Primula was kidnapped in the first place. Amid this, a servant delivers a personal message to the Viscount from King Ranunculus Caden, requesting the presence of the mage Kenishi Hamada at the royal capital immediately. Upon hearing this, Thogelum lets out a laugh and warns the rival to be careful. As the saying goes, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. After the villain's departure, Kenishi wonders why he brought up the issue of Primula's kidnapping. because as far as he knows, it was because some noble paid Shaga to do it. Maybe it's a plot by Viscount Thunbridge to dominate Astrantia and Dahlia. Crouton mentioned that Yurta is connected to Dahlia's Bacopa and was trying to make Mallow Company lose prestige after they gained prominence with the products Kanishi introduced. If that's the case, Kanishi thinks the kidnapping of Primula is his own fault. Thus, on his way home, he informs the Mallows that he wants to stop selling products to them for a while to try living a normal life. Despite this, it is true that he was summoned by the king, and he fears this may lead to several other problems he'll have to address later on. For her part, Primula doesn't see this as a problem, since great profits require great risks. Kanishi remembers that the girl nearly died at the hands of Shaga, but she includes this fact in her narrative and recalls that one of the company's mottos is that business is conducted for someone's happiness. In this case, the Mallow Company is ready for this, and Primula has decided to stand by Kanishi's side. She always knew that one day the man would come to the king's attention for his great deeds, and now it's time for him to reap those rewards. In any case, his future wife will be there to support him. At dawn, Anemone gifts Mary a book she made in secret, deeply touching her best friend. As the carriage of the girl's family departs, Norseball ensures that Crouton will play a key role in his realm, while Aine and Mary bid farewell, promising to see each other again. As the carriage moves away with everyone inside, the young mage runs after the vehicle, shouting her best friend's name. Miley and Naimna give the child a boost, carrying her to the traveler for one last goodbye. Then, finally, Crouton's family definitively leaves for the barony of Norseball. After this, Kanishi packs up his entire house. Back in the city, he questions Eupatorium what would happen if he fled instead of going to the royal capital, and the Viscount confesses that it is not very wise to disobey a king's orders, especially since they might suspect the Viscount of having hidden the mage somewhere. Thus, the protagonist is left with no choice but to go to the sovereign of this nation. The idea was to leave the women somewhere else to not involve them in this, but of course, everyone insisted on joining this journey.